Hey guys, tonight, we're stepping into the eerie halls of a house where the boundaries between the living and the dead are blurred. Imagine a sprawling mansion, dark corridors winding into forgotten rooms, and the distant echoes of footsteps that you're certain aren't your own. This isn't just any house. It's the infamous Winchester Mystery House. The legend surrounding this place is enough to send a shiver down your spine. But be warned, there's something unsettling about the air here, something that lingers long after you've walked out. You probably won't survive this, or at least not in the way you think. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The air was thick with the musty scent of old wood and dust as Sarah Winchester stepped into the quiet grandeur of her ever-expanding home. The mansion had begun as a modest farmhouse when she first inherited it, but now, in 1904, it was a sprawling labyrinth of rooms and hallways that defied all logic. There was no architectural plan, no blueprint to follow. Only Sarah's mind, her endless obsession with appeasing the spirits that haunted her. Sarah was a woman broken by loss. She had lost her daughter, her only child, to a tragic illness. And then her husband, the heir to the Winchester fortune, was taken from her as well. He was a man of great influence, his company producing the rifle that had become known as the gun that won the West. But now Sarah had nothing left except the legacy of death that had come with her husband's invention. The same death that now haunted her every waking moment. The voices had started softly at first. Whispers in the night just outside her window, murmurs too quiet to understand, but loud enough to make her skin crawl. It wasn't long before she began seeing things. Shadows in the corners of rooms, figures moving just out of sight. She'd wake in the dead of night, the sound of footsteps growing louder until she could almost feel the weight of a presence beside her. It was as though the house itself was alive, shifting and groaning under the weight of its own creation. And so Sarah began to build. Her construction was never meant to end. She worked day and night, adding room after room staircases that led nowhere and doors that opened into walls. No one could understand her reasoning, not the workers who labored tirelessly on the project, nor the people who visited, hoping to catch a glimpse of the woman who had become a local legend. Each night, Sarah would retreat to her study, her only refuge from the chaos of her thoughts. The walls of the house were thick solid. It was the only place she could hear her own voice, quiet and steady, as she conversed with those unseen spirits. It wasn't long before she came to believe that the house itself was cursed. The spirits were restless, angry at the bloodshed that the Winchester rifles had caused. They demanded appeasement, and only the endless construction could soothe them. She had designed the house to trap the spirits, to give them a place to roam and wander, to ensure they never grew restless enough to take her as their next victim. The spirits were a constant presence, she said. They were always watching, always whispering in the dark corners of her mind. But she had learned to live with it, to embrace it. The house was her protection, a physical manifestation of her grief, her guilt, and her attempt to atone for the lives lost to her husband's invention. As Sarah paced through the darkened halls of the mansion, she could almost hear the whispers rising and falling in waves. The spirits had been growing louder in recent weeks. They were demanding something from her, but she didn't know what. Each night, she would consult the spirits, trying to understand their language, decipher their cryptic messages. Sometimes the whispers grew into something more, a knock at the door, a rattle of chains' footsteps that echoed through the empty halls. She would follow the sounds down staircases that led nowhere into rooms she had never seen before. Tonight was different. Tonight the house felt heavier than usual, as though something had changed in the atmosphere. Sarah had heard the whispers all afternoon, growing louder, more insistent. She felt the air grow colder as she moved down the long corridor that led to the heart of the mansion. The shadows seemed to stretch and writhe against the walls, clinging to the edges of the room, as though they were alive. She stopped in front of a door that she had not opened in years. It was one of the newer rooms constructed only a few months ago with no clear purpose. It was an odd, narrow room, its walls lined with mirrors. The mirrors reflected her image back at her, but distorted, as if she were looking at a version of herself from another time. She had never quite understood why she had insisted on this room's creation. It was as though the room itself had called to her, pulling her in with an invisible force she couldn't ignore. As she stepped into the room, the temperature dropped sharply. Her breath came out in visible puffs, and she could feel the hairs on the back of her neck stand up. She wasn't alone. She could feel their presence lurking just beyond the mirrors, their eyes watching her every move. She had been told by the workers that the mirrors were a reflection of her soul, but Sarah knew better. The mirrors held something far darker. She had seen it in their depths, the flicker of someone lurking just beneath the surface. The whispers in the room grew louder, swirling around her, until they became an incoherent hum that filled her ears. She felt a pressure in her chest, as though something unseen was pushing down on her. Her hands trembled as she reached out toward the nearest mirror, her fingers brushing against its cold surface. The glass rippled beneath her touch, as though it were alive, pulsing with a strange energy. "Sarah." The voice was low and guttural, barely a whisper, but it froze her in place. It came from within the mirror, echoing in her mind. The voice was familiar. She had heard it before in her dreams, in her nightmares. It was the voice of her husband, William. The air around her grew thick with a sense of dread, as though the house itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. Sarah could hear the footsteps again, louder now, closer. They were coming for her. But she couldn't move, couldn't tear her eyes away from the mirror. "Sarah," the voice called again. And this time it was clearer, sharper. It came from right behind her, and as she turned, the mirror's reflection shifted. There was no longer just her own image. There was someone standing behind her. But when she spun around, no one was there. The stillness of the room was oppressive. The echoes of Sarah's rapid breathing filled the silence, and for a moment it felt as though the air itself had thickened, holding her in place. The whispering had stopped, but the weight of its presence remained lingering like a shadow in the corner of her mind. She glanced at the mirror again, half expecting to see her own reflection distorted, twisted into something monstrous. But the glass remained still, showing only the soft curve of her face and the shadows behind her stretching out into the farthest corners of the room. "Just the house playing tricks," she muttered to herself, though even she didn't believe her words. The house had been playing tricks for years, and tonight it felt more alive than ever. There was something different about the way the house groaned and whispered, something sinister lurking just beneath the surface. Sarah took a cautious step back, her feet reluctant to leave the room. But she knew she couldn't stay here forever, trapped in this oppressive space, waiting for the next unsettling thing to happen. She turned slowly, the floorboards creaking underfoot, and made her way toward the door. The hallway outside was dark, the only light coming from the faint glow of gas lamps at the far end. As Sarah walked, she could feel the house shifting around her, its pulse quickening with each step she took. The walls seemed to move almost imperceptibly, as though they were closing in on her. The floor felt uneven, as if she were walking on the edge of some hidden abyss. She reached the end of the corridor where a grand staircase spiraled upward into the unknown. She had climbed these stairs countless times before, but tonight They seemed to stretch endlessly toward the ceiling, disappearing into darkness. It was as though the house itself was trying to swallow her whole, pull her deeper into its labyrinth. The voices returned, faint whispers that seemed to come from all directions at once. They didn't sound like any of the spirits Sarah had grown used to over the years. These voices were different, sharp, angry, and full of malice. They didn't speak to her. They shouted at her, their words unintelligible, but their tone unmistakable. Sarah's heart pounded in her chest, the fear creeping up her spine like a cold, unseen hand. She paused at the base of the stairs, trying to steady her breath, but the air felt thick and heavy, almost suffocating. She had to keep going, had to keep moving forward. The spirits had never been this aggressive before. They were desperate, pushing against the walls of her mind, demanding something from her. She forced herself to take the first step, then another, and another. The sound of her footsteps echoed through the empty halls, the only thing breaking the silence that seemed to stretch forever. As she climbed, the whispers grew louder, more frantic, as though they were closing in on her, their presence pressing against her skin. When she reached the top of the stairs, Sarah was met with a long corridor that seemed to stretch on without end. At the farthest end, the faint flicker of a light caught her attention. It was coming from a door she hadn't seen before. She had been in this part of the house countless times, and yet this door was new, its wood dark and polished with intricate carvings etched into its surface. Curiosity overcame her, pushing her forward despite the rising tide of dread that threatened to overwhelm her. She walked toward the door, her hand trembling as she reached for the handle. It was cool to the touch, a stark contrast to the warmth of her skin. She turned it slowly, the sound of the lock clicking in her ears like a death knell. The door creaked open, revealing a room bathed in a soft golden light. The space inside was small, but it was unlike any other room in the house. It was pristine, untouched by time, as though it had been waiting for her. The walls were lined with shelves full of old books and trinkets, their spines cracked and yellowed with age. In the center of the room stood a large, ornate mirror, but this was no ordinary mirror. It was massive, stretching from the floor to the ceiling, its frame intricately carved with symbols Sarah didn't recognize. The glass was smooth and clear, reflecting the room around it in perfect detail, except for one thing. As Sarah stepped closer, she saw something she hadn't expected, her own reflection, but it was different. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with terror, as though she had seen something beyond the glass that she could not comprehend. Her reflection was not alone. A figure stood beside her, a shadowy shape that seemed to fade in and out of view. It was tall, with sharp, angular features that seemed familiar yet alien at the same time. The figure's eyes glowed with an unnatural light, cold and unblinking. Sarah's breath caught in her throat, and she took a step back, her heart racing in her chest. The figure in the mirror didn't move, but she could feel its gaze on her piercing through the glass. It wasn't just a reflection, it was something else, something ancient and powerful that had been trapped within the mirror for centuries. For a moment, Sarah couldn't tear her eyes away. The figure seemed to be beckoning her, its form shifting with each passing second. She knew deep down that whatever it wasn't a spirit. It was something far older, far more dangerous. And it wanted her. Her hand shot out, slamming against the doorframe as she tried to step back, but it was too late. The whispering voices had returned, louder now, almost deafening in their fury. The air grew colder, the temperature dropping so rapidly that she could see her breath in front of her. The figure in the mirror smiled, its sharp, inhuman teeth glinting in the soft light. Sarah felt her knees go weak, her body trembling with a fear she had never known. The house was alive, and it was not done with her yet. The mirror seemed to stretch in front of her, as though it was pulling her in deep into its dark, endless depths. The figure inside remained still, its glowing eyes fixed on Sarah with an intensity that made her feel as though she were drowning. Her breath quickened, each inhale, shallow, strained, as if the very air was being drained from the room. She wanted to scream, but no sound escaped her lips. Her voice caught in the web of fear that had begun to take hold of her. Her heart beat faster, a frantic rhythm she couldn't control. Her legs were stiff, frozen to the spot, unwilling to move as she stared at the creature. It wasn't just standing there. It was waiting for something, for her. A creeping dread began to crawl along her skin, spreading like ice, as she realized the true nature of the reflection. It wasn't a mirror at all. It was a gateway, a way for whatever lay beyond it to reach into her world. Without thinking, her body jerked forward, drawn by an invisible force. She reached out to touch the glass, her fingers trembling as they brushed against the cold surface. The instant her skin made contact, a shock of cold rushed through her as though the glass had turned to ice. The figure's smile widened, a sinister grin that seemed to mock her every movement. Suddenly, a soft click echoed through the room, as if the house itself had acknowledged her presence. The door slammed shut behind her, with a deafening crash trapping her inside. The light in the room flickered and died, plunging her into darkness. The only sound was the low hum of the house and the whispers, those terrible, frantic whispers that had been haunting her for so long. Sarah spun around, her heart racing, her hands shaking as she tried to find the door. But the room had changed. The walls were no longer where they had been. They had shifted, stretching and warping as if the house itself was alive, breathing in rhythm with her panicked breaths. She couldn't remember how she had entered or which direction she had come from. The space seemed to warp and twist, the hallway outside no longer accessible. The whispers grew louder, more distinct, each voice now a chorus of countless souls calling out to her in languages she couldn't understand. The air turned colder, and she felt a pressure against her chest, like an unseen weight, pressing her deeper into the room. She reached out for anything, her fingers grazing the walls in desperate search of an escape, but all she found was the smooth, unyielding surface of the mirror. It was then that she heard it, a low, guttural voice, deep and resonant, rising above the others. It was clear, commanding, and yet it sent a chill through her spine. Sarah. Her breath caught in her throat. The voice was unmistakable. It was her husband's. "Sarah, come closer." The words seemed to reverberate through her mind, crashing against her thoughts like waves. She tried to block them out, but they filled her, flooding her consciousness. The figure in the mirror shifted slightly, its outline becoming more defined, more corporeal. It no longer looked like a reflection. It looked real, as though it were standing right in front of her. Her pulse quickened. The voice, her husband's voice, continued to echo in her mind, pulling her closer to the mirror, to the figure within it. She knew that if she stepped forward, if she gave in to the call, something terrible would happen. But she couldn't stop herself. The pull was too strong, the urge to obey too overpowering. "Come to me," the voice urged, softer, now coaxing her. Sarah's fingers curled against the glass as her body moved against her will, her legs carrying her forward inch by inch. The whispers intensified, a cacophony of voices clamoring around her, but she could hear only the voice of her husband. And as she got closer, the figure in the mirror grew even more distinct, its features sharper, its eyes glowing with an unnatural light. The temperature in the room plummeted, and Sarah could see her breath condensing in the air, a faint cloud that disappeared as quickly as it appeared. Her feet dragged across the floor, every step heavier than the last, as though the weight of the house was bearing down on her, Sarah. And then, as her fingertips grazed the mirror, everything went dark. Not a gradual dimming, but a sudden, all-encompassing blackness that swallowed her whole. She felt weightless, suspended in the void, her body paralyzed, unable to move. The whispers stopped, and all that remained was the voice. It wasn't her husband anymore, though. It was something else. Come closer. The darkness pressed in on her, suffocating her, and then she felt it, an icy chill crawling up her spine, spreading through her limbs, freezing her from the inside out. The voice was no longer coaxing, no longer familiar. It was a command, a demand, and as the words echoed in her mind, she felt her body moving against her will, drawn towards something she couldn't understand. Suddenly, her vision returned, but the room was no longer the same. The mirror had vanished, replaced by a vast, empty expanse of shadow. The walls had melted away, and all that remained was the oppressive dark stretching on forever. She was no longer in the house. She was somewhere else, somewhere between worlds. Her heart pounded in her chest as she struggled to breathe, her thoughts clouded by the weight of the presence around her. There was something else here, something ancient and powerful, and it was watching her, waiting for her to succumb. The whispers returned, only now they were not just voices. They were shapes, shifting forms that surrounded her, pressing in from all sides. They were everywhere, and yet she could see none of them. Then, in the center of the dark void, something began to materialize, a figure tall and thin, its outline flickering like a broken light. It moved toward her, its steps slow and deliberate, and as it came closer, Sarah realized with horror that it was not alone. More figures appeared, each one more grotesque than the last, their features indistinguishable. Yet all of them had the same glowing eyes, the same cold, empty gaze. They reached for her, their cold hands closing in from all directions. Sarah screamed, but no sound escaped her lips. She was frozen in place, unable to move, unable to fight back, as the shadows closed in on her. And then the world went black once more. The darkness was heavy, an oppressive void that seemed to swallow everything around her. Sarah's senses were overloaded with a sense of dread, as if she were caught in the grip of something far older, far darker than anything she could comprehend. The coldness of the air bit into her skin, and the weight of unseen eyes pressing in from every corner was unbearable. Her body refused to move, her mind clouded by the overwhelming sense of helplessness. It felt as though the darkness itself had claimed her, and in that instant, she feared she might never leave. Then a flicker of light appeared, so faint at first that she almost thought it was a trick of her imagination. But as she focused, the light grew, blossoming into a soft, warm glow that surrounded her. The shadows recoiled from it, retreating like a dark tide, pulling back before the dawn. It wasn't much, but it was enough to offer her a glimpse of the world she had once known. The light was coming from somewhere far ahead, a distant beacon cutting through the endless black. It pulsed rhythmically, almost like a heartbeat, and it beckoned to her, calling her toward it. She wanted to move, to walk toward it, but her legs were frozen, bound by an invisible force that seemed to keep her rooted in place. She fought against it, her muscles straining, her body aching as she attempted to break free from the suffocating grip of the dark void. The whispers, once soft and distant, returned. They were no longer individual voices, but a chorus, hundreds, thousands of voices, all rising in unison. Some were familiar, soft and pleading, others harsh and demanding, but all were urgent, insistent. The voices seemed to swirl around her, crashing against her like waves against jagged rocks. Sarah, it was the same voice, her husband's voice, calling her again. But this time, there was something wrong with it. Something cold and hollow, like a memory trying to reach her from beyond the grave. The voice was no longer full of love, no longer a comfort. It was a command, a summons, dragging her deeper into the abyss. But the light, the warm, steady light, remained unwavering and constant. It pushed back against the darkness, a safe haven in a sea of terror. And for the first time in what felt like an eternity, Sarah was able to move. Her legs, though shaky, took a step forward, then another, and another. With each step, the darkness seemed to loosen its grip and the voices grew quieter, more distant, as if they were being left behind. As she walked toward the light, it became clearer, brighter. It was not just a glow anymore. It was a doorway, a threshold between worlds. She could see the outline of an archway, shimmering faintly, and beyond it, the familiar shape of the house she had built to protect herself. But this place was different. It was not the labyrinth of endless halls and staircases that had tormented her for years. It was a peaceful, quiet place, bathed in soft light. Sarah reached the threshold, her hand trembling as she stepped forward. The air here was warm, comforting, and the oppressive weight of fear began to lift from her shoulders. She stepped through the doorway, and immediately the whispers stopped. The darkness receded, replaced by a soft glow that bathed the room in a calming light. She was back in the house, but not the house she had known. This was different. The walls were smooth, unmarred by the cracks and creaks of the old mansion. The rooms were calm, peaceful. There were no hidden hallways or locked doors, no hidden rooms that could swallow her whole. It was as if the house had been restored, cleansed of the malevolent forces that had haunted it for so long. Sarah looked around, her heart still pounding in her chest, but a sense of relief washed over her. She wasn't alone here. There were figures standing at the edges of the room, but they weren't the grotesque shadows that had tormented her before. They were familiar, comforting, like old friends who had been waiting for her to return. Her husband stood at the center, his face warm and loving as it had once been. He smiled at her, and for the first time in so long, Sarah felt a flicker of peace within her. The grief, the guilt, the terror, all of it seemed to dissipate in the warmth of his gaze. He reached out his hand to her and she took it, her fingers trembling as she felt the familiar comfort of his touch. "We're together again, Sarah," he whispered, his voice soft and soothing, just as it had been in life. "You're safe now. We're safe." For a moment, Sarah felt as though she could finally rest. The weight of the house, of the endless construction, the haunting whispers, all of it was gone. She was free. She had made it through. She had found her way back. But as she gazed at her husband's face, something shifted in the air. The warmth of the room began to fade, the shadows creeping back into the corners. The figures at the edges of the room seemed to grow darker, their forms becoming more distorted, more ominous. The peace she had felt was slipping away, and with it, her sense of security. Her heart skipped a beat as she looked at her husband's face again. The smile that had once been warm and reassuring had twisted, distorted into something unnatural. His eyes, once filled with love, were now empty, hollow. They stared at her with an intensity that was almost predatory. "Sarah," he said again, his voice now low, unnatural. "You didn't think you could escape, did you?" Her body stiffened as the room began to warp around her. The walls twisted, the light flickering and dimming as the darkness began to reclaim the space. The figures at the edges of the room closed in on her, their faces shifting into grotesque, distorted shapes. "No," she whispered, her voice breaking. "No, this can't be happening." But it was happening. The house was not done with her yet. It had drawn her in, and it would not let her go. The warmth she had felt, was nothing more than a trap, a lure to draw her into its depths. The whispers returned louder, now deafening. The house was alive again, and Sarah was its prisoner. The walls of the room pulsed with a sinister rhythm, as though the house itself had a heartbeat, slow, steady, but unyielding in its power. The floor beneath Sarah's feet seemed to shift, as though the very ground she stood on was alive, groaning and twisting beneath her weight. The figures that had once been comforting were now monstrous, their features melting and reshaping into grotesque masks of agony and hunger. Their eyes, once lifeless, now burned with an unholy fire, fixated on Sarah, their gaze pinning her in place. Her heart raced, pounding in her chest with an almost physical force. The fear she had once tried to suppress bubbled to the surface, choking her, suffocating her. She wanted to run to escape, but her legs wouldn't move. The room had become a prison, the walls closing in, and with every step she tried to take, the shadows seemed to grow thicker, darker, until she was completely surrounded. Her husband's figure, the one she had once trusted, loved, stretched toward her. His body was no longer human, no longer the man she had once known. His skin had turned ashen, his limbs elongated, and twisted, his eyes wide with malice. He reached out for her, his fingers gnarled and claw-like, the smile that had once been so warm, now a twisted grimace that threatened to devour her. "Sarah," he whispered again, but this time his voice was not his own. It was low, guttural, and full of a hunger that sent a chill down her spine. "You can't leave. Not now. Not ever." The walls began to close in on her, the air thick and heavy, suffocating her with its weight. Sarah could hear the whispers rising once more, this time louder and more frantic, their voices overlapping, a cacophony of torment. It was as if the house itself was alive, its very essence reaching out to claim her. The shadows seemed to grow teeth, curling around her, their tendrils reaching out for her, dragging her closer to the center of the room. She stumbled backward, her hand grasping for anything to hold on to. But there was nothing, only the cold, unfeeling walls of the house. The mirrors on the walls began to crack, their surfaces splintering like glass, each shard reflecting a distorted version of reality. She could see herself in the mirrors, her eyes wide with terror, her face pale, her body trembling. "Sarah, you're mine now," the figure said again, its voice thick with a malicious glee. Its hands stretched toward her, its claws sharp and elongated, ready to tear into her very soul. But just as she thought she could take no more, a sudden burst of light pierced through the room. It wasn't warm or comforting. It was harsh, blinding, like the flash of a storm on the horizon. The shadows recoiled at the light, their forms flickering and warping, unable to withstand its intensity. The figure in front of her screamed in agony, its form beginning to disintegrate in the light's fury. Sarah stood frozen, the light searing through her, casting her shadow long and distorted on the walls. She felt its heat, its pull, but she didn't move. The shadows were retreating, slithering away into the corners of the room, their forms dissolving into the ether. And then, with a deafening crash, the house seemed to groan as though it were alive, a massive sentient being, recoiling from the onslaught of the light. The figure that had once been her husband was now gone, reduced to nothing more than a shadow of its former self, flickering and vanishing into the air. The room, once thick with darkness, began to clear, the oppressive weight lifting slowly, piece by piece. But even as the shadows retreated, Sarah could still feel their presence lurking just beyond the edges of the light. The house had not released her. It was still there, still waiting for her to slip, to falter. The whispers, though quieter now, still filled the air, weaving in and out of her consciousness like a sickening lullaby. Sarah felt herself moving, though she was unsure if it was by her own will. Her feet carried her across the room through the now empty space. The mirrors had stopped cracking their surfaces smooth once more, but the reflection they showed was no longer her own. It was a stranger's face, a twisted version of herself, hollow-eyed and gaunt, its smile cold and unforgiving. Her body lurched as she stepped away from the mirror, the room spinning around her. She could hear it now, the low hum of the house, a constant pulse that seemed to resonate with her own heartbeat. The air was still thick, but the shadows had not disappeared. They remained in the corners, silent and waiting, as if watching her every move. The house wasn't done with her. It was far from finished. And as Sarah made her way down the winding corridors, she could feel it, the weight of its presence looming over her like a specter that would never let her go. The walls groaned, the floorboards creaked, and the whispers rose again, this time with a mocking edge. Sarah stumbled into a room she hadn't seen before, one that seemed to appear out of nowhere, as though the house had decided to show it to her now. The walls were lined with old portraits' faces. She did not recognize their eyes, following her every movement. The room was cluttered with old furniture pieces of broken china and remnants of a life that no longer existed. She walked further into the room, her steps slow, deliberate, her body numb, as though she were walking through a dream. The room seemed to stretch on forever, the shadows thickening as she moved further into its depths. She could hear the whispers again, this time, more distinct, more personal. Sarah. They were calling her name, pulling her deeper into the darkness. The temperature dropped, a chill settling over her skin as she looked toward the far wall. There in the corner was another mirror. But this one was different. It wasn't like the others, reflecting only what was in front of it. This mirror, like the house itself, was a gateway, a portal to something else. Sarah could feel it, the pull of it, deep within her bones. She stepped toward the mirror, hesitating just for a moment, but the force drawing her in was too strong. The whispers grew louder, the shadows closer. She reached out for the mirror, her hand trembling as she touched its surface. And in that instant, the world around her shattered. The moment Sarah's fingers made contact with the surface of the mirror, the world around her collapsed into a swirl of light and darkness. It was as though the very fabric of reality had been torn apart, leaving her suspended in an abyss that stretched out infinitely in all directions. The cold from the mirror seeped into her skin, a chilling numbness creeping through her body, as though the glass itself was consuming her, pulling her into its depths. Her heart raced, and her breath quickened her chest, tightening with the weight of fear. But the fear was no longer just from the house. It was something else, something far more ancient and primal. The whispers, now louder and more insistent, echoed in her mind, their voices swirling like a storm until they were one unified, deafening roar. She could feel them, feel the souls, the spirits all around her. The house had been a prison, but now she had crossed into their domain. Her body trembled as she was pulled deeper, her feet no longer touching the ground. The shadows around her seemed to form into shapes, figures, but they were not human. They were something else. Something twisted their forms, shifting in the dark, their eyes glowing with an unnatural light. Some were grotesque, their features distorted and jagged, while others were nothing but wisps of smoke, their outlines barely visible against the void. They reached out toward her, their hands like claws, their fingers long and skeletal, their faces stretched in expressions of torment. Sarah struggled against the pull, her limbs heavy and uncooperative, but the force from the mirror was relentless. It gripped her tightly, forcing her forward deeper into the void. She opened her mouth to scream, but no sound came out. Her voice was swallowed by the darkness, consumed by the infinite silence that surrounded her. The weight of her fear, her regret, her sorrow, all of it pressed in on her, suffocating her until she thought she might drown in it. The whispers returned, their voices clear and sharp like 1,000 knives scraping across stone. "You can never leave," they hissed, each voice a cold, mocking taunt. "This is where you belong. Forever." The world around her twisted, the shapes of the spirits closing in their hands, brushing against her skin, sending shocks of cold through her body. Their eyes bored into her soul, their gaze suffocating like they were tearing her apart from the inside out. She could feel them probing her mind, sifting through her memories, her darkest fears. They knew her every secret, her every regret. "Sarah." It was her husband's voice again, but it was no longer comforting. It was distorted, twisted, as though it had been mangled by the spirits that lingered here. "You failed them. You failed me." The words struck her like a blow deep in her chest. She had failed. She had failed them all. The voices had been right all along. The house had never been a refuge. It had been a prison, a cage to hold her, to keep her from facing the truth of her actions. The lives lost, the spirits that had never found peace. All of it was on her shoulders. Tears welled in Sarah's eyes as she reached out her hand, grasping at the nothingness, trying to hold on to something, anything, to break free from the suffocating darkness. But there was nothing. There was no escape. She was trapped in this endless void, lost between the worlds of the living and the dead. And then, just as she thought she might break, just as the weight of the darkness threatened to crush her completely, there was a flicker, a light, a faint, distant glow that pierced through the void, cutting through the blackness like a beam of hope. It was not warm or inviting. It was cold, like the light from the moon on a winter's night, but it was real. It was something. Sarah's body jerked, and the pull from the mirror seemed to loosen just for a moment. She didn't know where the light had come from, but it was the only thing in this void that felt real, that felt like it might offer her a way out. She reached toward it, her body moving without her command, as though the light had a magnetic force that drew her in. The spirits around her screamed, their voices rising in a cacophony of rage and desperation. They reached for her, their hands grasping at her ankles, at her wrists, trying to pull her back into the darkness. But she couldn't stop herself. She was moving toward the light, her legs carrying her forward faster and faster, until the shadows around her began to recede, fading into the distance. The light grew brighter, more intense, until it was the only thing she could see, the only thing she could feel. It surrounded her, wrapping her in its cold embrace, pulling her upward out of the abyss, out of the clutches of the spirits that had held her captive for so long. And then in a sudden violent rush, she was free. Sarah gasped as the darkness shattered around her, the world coming back into focus. She was no longer in the void, no longer suspended in that endless nightmare. She was standing in the hallway of the Winchester Mystery House, the cool air brushing against her skin, the light from the lanterns casting long shadows across the walls. She was back. She was alive. But the house was different. It was quieter. The whispers were gone. The weight that had pressed down on her for so long had lifted, leaving behind only the echoes of her own breath. The house was still and calm, as though it had been waiting for her to return, waiting for her to make the choice to escape. Sarah stood there for a moment, catching her breath, her body trembling as the reality of what had just happened began to sink in. She had escaped. She had left the house, left the spirits, and she was free. But she knew deep down that the house had never truly let her go. It had merely been biding its time, waiting for the right moment to call her back. And one day, she would return. the house would call her again, just as it had called the others before her. Until then, Sarah would carry its whispers with her, tucked away in the dark corners of her mind, a reminder that the house was always waiting, always watching. And one day it would come for her again. The house, though silent now, was not truly at peace. Its very walls seemed to breathe, to pulse with a life of their own. Sarah felt it, even as she stood in the corridor, the shadows that lingered around her, still thick with an ancient, unseen presence. The temperature was colder than it had been before, colder than it should have been given the hour. Every step she took seemed to echo unnaturally in the stillness, a constant reminder that the house was never truly empty. As she moved her footsteps slow and cautious, she couldn't help but glance over her shoulder, half expecting to see the ghostly figure of her husband, or worse, the distorted faces of the spirits that had once surrounded her. But the house remained as it had been when she first arrived, dark, winding, full of its secrets. And yet something had changed. A quiet hum filled the air, a sound that started low like a murmur at the back of her mind. At first it was so faint, she could almost dismiss it as a trick of the wind or a lingering echo from the depths of the mansion. But as she moved further into the house, the hum grew louder, more insistent. It came from everywhere, from the walls, from the floors, from the very bones of the house itself. Sarah paused in her steps, her heart skipping a beat. The hum wasn't random. It was deliberate, rhythmic, almost like a chant. The air grew heavier, denser, as though the house were alive, breathing in time with the sound. And then just as the hum reached a fever pitch, a door creaked open to her left, the hinges groaning in protest. She had never seen this door before. It had never been there. Not in all the years she had spent walking through this house day after day, night after night. This was a new door, against every instinct, every warning that screamed for her to turn and run. Sarah stepped toward it. The door was open wide, the darkness beyond it, inviting as though the shadows themselves beckoned her inside. Without thinking, she stepped through the threshold, the temperature dropping sharply as soon as she crossed the threshold. It was a small room, smaller than most of the other chambers in the mansion, with walls that were covered in dust and cobwebs. But the air was thick with the scent of something old, something ancient. A mirror stood in the center of the room, framed by tarnished silver, its surface coated with a layer of grime. The mirror reflected nothing except darkness stretching deep beyond the glass, as though it were an opening to some other world. Sarah could feel the pull of it, like the siren's call, deep and compelling, drawing her toward it. She stepped closer to the mirror, her hands trembling as they reached out to wipe away the dust, revealing the glass beneath. Her reflection flickered in and out, distorting, as if something else was behind her, something lurking just out of sight. Her heart pounded in her chest, her breathing shallow as she tried to make sense of the image before her. But there was nothing, only her own face, pale and haunted, staring back at her with wide, fearful eyes. That's when it happened. The room shifted. The walls closed in, and the temperature dropped even further, turning her breath into mist. The mirror began to crack slowly at first, the sound echoing in her ears. Each fracture in the glass seemed to pull something out of the depths of the house, something ancient and hungry. Her reflection twisted, bending into shapes that didn't belong to her. Something behind her in the glass was moving something that had never been there before. She spun around, heart-racing, eyes wide with terror. But the room was empty. There was nothing behind her. And yet she could feel the presence, a weight in the air that made her skin crawl, a sensation of eyes watching her, unseen but ever present. The cracks in the mirror deepened, spreading like veins, until the glass shattered, splintering into 1,000 pieces. The pieces fell to the floor, but something was different now. The room was no longer just a room. It was a doorway, a passage. A low, guttural voice rumbled from the shattered mirror, reverberating through the walls and shaking the very foundation of the house. "Welcome back," it said. Sarah's breath caught in her throat as the room seemed to come alive around her. The shadows stretched, bending toward her, wrapping around her like tendrils, pulling her into the darkness. The walls groaned, the floor buckled beneath her feet, and in the blink of an eye, the room began to twist and warp, the very fabric of reality tearing apart. She fought, struggled against the pull of the house, but it was too strong. The darkness was consuming her, its cold fingers gripping her body, dragging her toward the broken mirror. "No?" she screamed, but her voice was swallowed by the shadow, the words lost in the endless abyss. Her vision blurred, the edges of her world darkening as she was sucked deeper into the mirror, her body no longer her own. She felt her mind unravel, torn between the realms of the living and the dead. The house had called her back, just as it had promised, and now there was no escape. As Sarah was swallowed by the darkness, she realized the truth. The house would never let her go. It was a part of her, and she was a part of it, forever bound. And as the last of her consciousness faded, she heard the whispering again, louder than ever, the voices of the house, the spirits, the souls trapped within its walls. "Forever, you will be ours." The darkness engulfed her, a suffocating abyss where time seemed to stretch endlessly, its grip tightening around her. Sarah's body had long ceased to move, suspended in a void that felt like an eternity. The air was thick with the scent of old wood dampness and the faintest trace of something far older, something unnatural. Her heart, though still beating, felt as though it had been ripped from her chest and replaced with the very pulse of the house itself. She could feel it now, the house. It was alive, breathing, shifting, a creature that had been watching, waiting for her to return. Its walls creaked with satisfaction. Its floors groaned under the weight of its secrets. The whispers returned, not the distant hum of before, but now they were a deafening roar crashing against her ears, their voices sharp, insistent, like a million tortured souls crying out for release. "Sarah," her name rang out, not from a familiar voice, but from everywhere, from every direction, as though the very house was speaking to her. The sound reverberated in her mind, slicing through her consciousness. "Sarah, come home." It wasn't just a voice. It was a presence. It wasn't just calling her name. It was calling her soul, her very essence, as if she were meant to be here, in this dark, forsaken place. A place where the living and the dead were bound together, tethered in an unholy bond. "Sarah?" The voice came again, and this time it was clearer, closer. She blinked, her vision beginning to clear, but the world around her was unrecognizable. The walls of the house had dissolved, replaced by an endless expanse of shadow, a stretch of darkness that seemed to stretch on for miles. In front of her stood a figure, tall, thin, draped in shadows, its form shifting in and out of focus. It was familiar, but not quite. Its eyes gleamed with an unsettling hollow light, and it smiled, though its smile was not one of warmth. It was her husband, or at least it looked like him, the man she had loved. But this version of him was twisted, corrupted by the house, his form bent by the shadows that surrounded them. "No, this isn't you, Sarah," whispered her voice, shaking. Her heart pounded in her chest, her breath shallow as she took a step back. But the figure in front of her only smiled wider, its eyes gleaming with something far darker. "It's me, Sarah. And it's always been me." The darkness around her pressed in closer, tighter. The figure reached out its fingers, stretching toward her, the air growing colder with each inch it came closer. You never left. You've always belonged here. Just as I have. A chill ran down Sarah's spine as she stumbled backward, her mind reeling. The shadows seemed to shift and move with the figure, the house itself closing in on her, wrapping her in a suffocating embrace. Her heart raced, but no matter how hard she tried to move, she was rooted to the spot. The pull of the figure, the pull of the house was too strong. No, I didn't. Sarah's voice faltered, her words struggling to escape as the figure inched closer. You belong to me. You belong to this house. The voice was no longer her husband's. It was something else, something deep, ancient, and primal. You're not the first, Sarah, and you won't be the last. The walls around her began to shift again, the darkness becoming more tangible, pressing against her, seeping into her skin, into her very being. The house was more than just a structure. It was a living entity, feeding on her fear, on the souls it had trapped for so long. It had been waiting for her return, waiting to reclaim her, to draw her back into its twisted fold. Suddenly the room snapped back into place. Sarah was no longer alone in the darkness. There were others, figures that emerged from the shadows, their forms flickering in and out of existence. Some were dressed in old-fashioned clothes, others in tattered rags. Their faces were ghostly pale, their eyes hollow and dead. They all stared at Sarah, their gaze fixed on her with an intensity that made her skin crawl. "This is your fate." One of the figures whispered, its voice raspy like dry leaves scraping against the ground. "This is what you are, Sarah." Another figure said, its voice sweet but laced with malice. "You are one of us now, and we will never let you go." The realization hit her like a wave. These were the spirits that had haunted the house for years, trapped by its endless corridors, its winding staircases that led nowhere. They were the souls of those who had perished, those who had been drawn to the house just as she had, only to become lost in its labyrinthine depths. And now Sarah was one of them, trapped forever, bound to the house, her soul tethered to its dark, malevolent force. "No." Sarah gasped, her voice hoarse, the words barely escaping her lips. "I won't stay here. I won't be like you." But the figure in front of her only smiled. Its eyes glowed with an unholy light as it reached out and placed a cold, skeletal hand on her arm. The touch was like ice seeping into her very bones. "It's too late," the figure whispered. "You have always belonged here, just as we do." The darkness pressed closer still, the whispers growing louder, until they were all she could hear, all she could feel. The house had claimed her just as it had claimed so many before, and no matter how hard she struggled, no matter how desperately she fought, there would be no escape. She was home now, and the house would never let her go. The darkness settled in like a heavy fog surrounding Sarah in its suffocating embrace. Her body was paralyzed, caught between the living and the dead, unable to break free from the cold grip of the house. The spirits that surrounded her were not just lingering memories, but echoes of those lost within the labyrinth, lost to the madness of the house. She could feel their cold, spectral hands brushing against her, their hollow eyes watching her with a mixture of sorrow and wrath. The house was alive, feeding off their fear, their torment. And now it was feeding off hers. A low hum filled the air again, like the pulse of the house itself, an insistent beat that grew louder and more oppressive with every passing second. The shadows seemed to grow thicker, the walls closing in, pushing her closer to the center of this unholy gathering. Her breath caught in her throat as she struggled to move, but the weight of the house was too much, too overwhelming. "You'll never escape, Sarah." The voice came again now, more numerous, a chorus of whispers that filled the room, the house, the very air around her. You were never meant to. The figure before her, the one that had once been her husband, now loomed larger, its form shifting and stretching into something unrecognizable. The warmth she had once felt was gone, replaced by a chilling, malevolent presence. Its eyes burned with an intensity that pierced through her, a cold fire that gnawed at her soul. "No," Sarah gasped, her voice barely a whisper. "This isn't you. This isn't my home." But the house responded with a violent shudder, as though it had heard her words and found them lacking. The walls seemed to breathe, the very wood and stone groaning in response, and the whispering grew louder, more frantic, as if the house itself were laughing. "You never understood, did you?" The figure said, its voice no longer her husband's, but something darker, something ancient. "This house isn't just a building. It's a place where souls are bound, where the living are just as lost as the dead. And you, Sarah, have always been one of us." Her legs shook as she tried to stand the weight of the house pressing down on her, pulling her into the ground. But despite the heavy presence that surrounded her, Sarah refused to give in. She would not become one of these spirits. She would not be lost in the same hellish cycle that had claimed so many before her. But as she looked around, her resolve began to waver. The figures, once distant, now stood right before her, their eyes hollow and endless, staring straight through her. Their forms flickered like shadows, but they were more than just shadows. They were souls torn from the earth, trapped in the house, never to escape. The very air felt thick with their presence. The room was no longer just a room. It was an endless space, a place without time, or place of void that swallowed all that came within it. The house, the spirits, and Sarah were now bound together, all trapped in this nightmare of their own making. "Sarah," a soft voice whispered, though it didn't come from any of the figures around her. It was her own voice, her own mind pulling at her. "You wanted to escape, but there is no escape. There is only this." A shudder ran through her body as the house groaned, its walls stretching, bending toward her. It was alive, feeding off the emotions of the lost, and Sarah was no different. Her fear, her guilt, all of it was being absorbed into the very fabric of the house. She was its prisoner, and no matter how far she ran, she would never escape. The house wasn't just a place of suffering, it was the suffering itself, the embodiment of all those who had been consumed by it. And as Sarah realized this truth, a wave of understanding crashed over her. She wasn't just a victim of the house, she was part of it. Her soul, her memories, her life, all had become part of the house's twisted eternal cycle. She took a step back, her mind reeling, but the spirits around her closed in their hands, reaching out for her, their cold fingers grazing her skin. The pull was irresistible, and before she could fight it, she felt herself drawn toward the mirror that stood before her, reflecting nothing but a darkness that seemed to stretch infinitely. And then she saw it, a figure in the mirror, a reflection that wasn't hers but something older, something that had always been there, hidden beneath the surface. It was a part of her, her fear, her grief, her guilt. It had all manifested into this figure, this part of herself that she had buried long ago. The figure in the mirror smiled at her, a grin full of malice and understanding. "You've come home, Sarah. You've always belonged here." With a final desperate cry, Sarah reached for the mirror, but before her fingers could touch the glass, everything stopped. The house, the figures, the darkness, all of it froze in an instant, and then there was nothing. Sarah stood in the silence, her mind empty, her body still. The whispers were gone. The house was gone. She was alone, surrounded by nothing but endless quiet space. There were no walls, no spirits, no more shadows. It was as though everything had vanished, leaving only the cold void of her own mind. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, Sarah could breathe. The suffocating weight of the house was gone. She was free, but as she stood there, the silence began to change. The darkness shifted once more, and she could feel the cold breath of something behind her. Slowly, she turned, her heart hammering in her chest. The house was not finished with her. It had simply been waiting for her to fall asleep, to drift back into the endless cycle of its walls, its whispers, its dark embrace. And in that moment, she knew the truth. The house would never let her go. It was never meant to. The silence around Sarah was overwhelming, almost suffocating, as though the universe had forgotten her existence entirely. There were no whispers, no shadows, no figures lurking in the dark. Only the soft, haunting echo of her own breath, quick and shallow, in the oppressive emptiness. The darkness seemed to stretch on forever, but it was different now. It wasn't the suffocating void of the house. It was a waiting, an endless pause. Her mind raced as the realization settled in. The house was still there somewhere. It had never truly let her go. It had only lulled her into an illusion of peace, a fleeting respite before it would come for her again. Sarah, the whisper was faint, just a murmur at first, but it was enough to make her skin crawl. It was a voice, her name being drawn out of the void. It was gentle at first, almost comforting, but it quickly turned sharper, darker, a sound that twisted through her mind and scraped at her consciousness. "You're still here." The words felt like a weight, heavy and suffocating, pulling her back into reality. Slowly, with a sense of dread curling in her gut, Sarah turned. She didn't want to. She didn't need to. But something was urging her, a compulsion she couldn't fight. A shadow stretched in front of her, moving ever closer, its edges blurry, unshapely. The same darkness that had once consumed her now seemed to solidify, taking form. Out of the inky blackness, something emerged. A figure, tall, twisted, its features flickering like an image caught between worlds. Sarah's heart skipped a beat as she recognized it. It was a distorted reflection of herself, but it wasn't her. The face was pale eyes, hollow, a cruel smile carved into its lips. "No," Sarah whispered, her voice cracking. "I can't." But the figure interrupted her with a low, guttural laugh that echoed in the emptiness. "Do you think you can escape it?" Mocked. "Do you think the house will ever let you go? It owns you, Sarah. It has from the moment you stepped inside." The darkness around her shifted once more, and Sarah could feel the familiar weight of the house settling around her. The walls, the corridors, the endless maze, it was all coming back. The whispers, once distant, now thrummed in her ears, growing louder with every passing second. They were alive. They were real, and they had always been there, just waiting. Sarah tried to move, tried to step back, but her feet felt as though they were glued to the ground, rooted in place by an unseen force. Her pulse hammered in her throat, and every breath felt like it was being stolen from her. "No, I won't go back," she muttered, her voice a hoarse whisper, as she clenched her fists, trying to summon the strength to break free. The figure in front of her took a step closer, its smile widening, showing sharp, jagged teeth. "You can't stop it. The house never forgets. It never releases its hold." Sarah struggled against the invisible chains, her hands trembling as she reached out for something, anything to hold on to. But there was nothing. The space around her was vast, an endless chasm, and the house seemed to fold in on itself, its walls warping into new, unfamiliar shapes. "I won't be trapped again," she cried, but her words fell flat, lost in the void that was closing in on her. Her own voice seemed so small now, so insignificant in the face of the house's insatiable hunger. The figure before her began to stretch, growing taller, its arms elongating as though it were reaching for her, pulling her back into the darkness. And then for a moment everything stopped. The whispers grew quiet, the figure stilled, and the weight that had been pressing on her chest lifted just enough for her to catch her breath. In that instant of quiet, she saw it the faintest flicker of light at the edge of the abyss. It was small, but it was there. A doorway, a faint outline that shimmered like a star in the far distance. For a moment, Sarah hesitated. She was so close to the darkness, so close to the grip of the house, but the light called to her. It was the only thing she had left her last chance at escape. With a burst of energy, Sarah forced herself to move. Her feet found solid ground, and her body propelled forward toward the light. The figure behind her roared in fury, its form flickering like a dying flame. The whispers rose to a deafening crescendo, the air thick with their rage, but Sarah kept moving faster now, her mind focused only on the light, on the hope it represented. Each step she took felt heavier, the darkness fighting to pull her back, to drag her into the suffocating embrace of the house. But she was stronger now, fueled by the desperation to be free. As she neared the light, it grew brighter, its glow more intense, more solid. She could feel the warmth of it against her skin, its gentle embrace pulling her closer, farther from the darkness from the house. With one final desperate push, she reached the light. The moment her hand touched the threshold, everything shattered. The darkness screamed in agony, the figure's face contorting in rage, its form disintegrating into the void. The whispers died away, their voices fading into silence as the light enveloped Sarah, wrapping around her like a cocoon, shielding her from the horror of the house. And then with a sudden rush, she was free. The cold, oppressive weight lifted entirely, and the light around her grew warm and inviting, pulling her into its embrace. The shadows receded, the house faded away, and for the first time in what felt like forever, Sarah could breathe. She was free. The house, the spirits, the darkness, they were gone. And Sarah, with her heart still racing, but her body finally at rest, stood in the calm and the quiet, where the light stretched out endlessly before her. She had escaped, or so she thought. For a moment, Sarah allowed herself to breathe, to feel the weight of the light surrounding her, enveloping her in its warm, soothing embrace. The darkness, the terror, the house, it all seemed so distant now, as if it had never truly been a part of her life. The light before her stretched infinitely, offering peace and freedom, something she had longed for since she first set foot in that accursed house. But as she stood there, suspended between what was and what could be, a creeping sensation began to coil in the pit of her stomach, a quiet unease. The light, so bright and beautiful, was now tinged with something unsettling. The longer she stared into it, the more she began to question its warmth. It wasn't the pure, comforting glow she had felt earlier. It was colder now, darker, as though the light itself were hiding something. Her heartbeat quickened. She wanted to step forward to leave the shadow of the house behind, but she couldn't. Something held her back, an invisible pull that threatened to drag her into the very core of the light. It wasn't the same as the house's suffocating grasp, but it was still a force, and it was stronger than anything she had felt before. Suddenly the light flickered, a quick, sharp blink like a heartbeat. "Sarah," the whisper came again, but this time it wasn't from the depths of the house. It wasn't from the spirits that had tormented her. It was the voice of her husband, but not the twisted, shadowed version of him. No, this voice was calm, familiar, full of warmth and love, just as it had been when he was alive. It was calling to her, gently beckoning her closer. Sarah froze, her chest tightening. She recognized the voice, but a nagging part of her buried deep within told her to be wary, to be careful. The light, the voice, it all felt too perfect, too peaceful, like an illusion. "Sarah, come to me." The voice was sweet, like honey tempting her with the promise of what she had always wanted: reunion, peace, the end of the torment. The house, the spirits, it had all been so much to bear. But here in the light, there was no more fear, no more darkness. But Sarah hesitated. Her mind flickered back to the house, to the figures, to the twisted whispers, to the house that had never truly let her go. Had she escaped, or had she simply fallen into another trap? Was this light merely another layer of the house's endless torment? The voice called again, more insistent, more urgent. "Sarah, it's time." She clenched her fists, the cold of uncertainty creeping into her bones. Could she trust this? Could she trust the light? Or was it another part of the house's design, another trap laid for her? She stepped back. The moment she did, the light flickered once more. This time it wasn't just a blink. It was a shudder, a pulse, as though the light were dying. The warmth that had once bathed her now turned cold, almost metallic. The shadows she had left behind began to creep back, forming at the edges of the light, slowly filling the empty space she had once thought safe. The voice twisted. It was no longer warm or loving. It was cold, mocking, and full of an ancient rage. "You think you can escape me?" It hissed, its tone sharp like the crack of a whip. The light began to distort, swirling into dark, swirling shapes. The pull of the darkness returned, tugging at her once again. The house had never been gone. It had simply been waiting, waiting for her to fall into the trap of its false hope, its illusions of peace. Sarah gasped, her body stiffening with realization. She had not escaped. The house had simply used the light to draw her in, to make her believe she was free when she was still its prisoner. The walls of the room began to form again, but they weren't the walls of a peaceful place. They were cold, jagged, made of the same crumbling, decayed wood that had once encased her in that dreadful house. The shadows twisted, becoming figures that circled around her, their eyes glowing, their forms shifting and writhing. Her heart pounded in her chest as the air thickened, the temperature dropping with each passing second. The house was back. But this time, it was not just the house. It was something much worse, something ancient, something far darker. It was feeding on her despair, on her belief that she could escape. But Sarah wouldn't give up. Not this time. With a fierce breath, she took a step back, and then another. She wasn't just fighting to escape the house anymore. She was fighting for herself, for her mind, for her very soul. She could feel the pull, the weight of the house closing in on her. But this time, she refused to yield. The house, the spirits, it had been a part of her, yes. But she was not the house. She was more than that. And she wouldn't let it consume her again. The whispering grew louder, but she shut it out. She could feel the presence behind her, the figure in the darkness, but she didn't look back. She could hear the mocking laugh, but she ignored it. 1 step, 2 steps. She was moving. She was fighting. And then, just as it felt like she couldn't take another step, the light came back this time, not as an illusion, not as a trap, but as something real, something pure. The shadows recoiled as the light flooded the space, its warmth surrounding her once more. The figure behind her screamed in frustration, but it couldn't reach her. With a final desperate push, Sarah ran toward the light. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. She had learned in that moment that the only way out was forward. The house was no longer her prison. The house was nothing. The light enveloped her, swallowing her whole, and she felt the last remnants of the darkness slip away, the weight of the house lifting from her shoulders. There was no more fear, no more whispers, no more figures in the shadows. She was free. Sarah stood in the light, the glow surrounding her like a protective shield. It was warm now, gentle, a soft embrace that contrasted sharply with the cold, suffocating darkness that had pursued her for so long. The air felt different, clearer, fresher, like the first breath after being submerged underwater. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, she felt her pulse slow, her racing heart calming with each deep breath she took. Her body ached, her muscles exhausted from the struggle, but the overwhelming sense of relief that washed over her was undeniable. The house, the horrors, the whispers, the endless terror, it was all gone, faded into the ether like a bad dream. She could feel it, now the stillness of the space around her, the absence of the oppressive force that had once threatened to consume her. But as she stood there basking in the warmth of the light, a quiet realization settled within her. The peace she had fought so hard for felt fragile, as if it could slip away the moment she let her guard down. The light, though comforting, was a reminder of how close she had been to being lost forever. The house had shown her what it could take from her, what it could do to her mind, her soul. She closed her eyes, allowing herself a moment to breathe deeply. The shadows had been banished, yes, but they had left their mark on her. She knew that much. The scars they had left on her psyche would never fully fade. But she also knew that she had fought for her freedom. She had fought for herself. She wasn't the same person who had wandered into that house years ago. She was stronger now, wiser, more attuned to the things that sought to consume her. A sound faint but unmistakable broke the silence, a creaking soft and low like the groan of wood settling under pressure. Sarah's breath caught in her throat as she opened her eyes. The light around her flickered, its intensity wavering like a candle caught in a breeze. Her heart skipped a beat as she looked around, searching for the source of the sound. She hadn't imagined it, had she? The creaking came again, followed by the unmistakable sound of footsteps, slow and deliberate, moving across the floor. The noise was faint at first, but it grew louder, closer. Her body stiffened, a cold shiver running down her spine. The light flickered again, and she could feel the atmosphere change heavy with the return of something she had hoped was gone forever. Her hand instinctively went to the pendant around her neck, the last thing she had left of her family, the last piece of herself that was still human, still tethered to the world outside the house. She closed her fingers around it, trying to draw strength from the comfort it had once given her. But now the pendant felt cold, distant. Another creak. Her eyes darted toward the doorway that stood before her. It was still bathed in light, but the edges of the room seemed to warp. The walls twisted, darkened, and the doorframe shuddered as though the house was breathing once again, awakening from its long slumber. "No," Sarah whispered, her voice trembling. She took a step back, but her feet felt heavy, as if the very ground beneath her was trying to hold her in place, preventing her from leaving. The footsteps grew louder now, unmistakably real, coming from the other side of the door. She wasn't alone. Her breath hitched in her throat as a figure appeared in the doorway. It was her, but it wasn't. The woman that stood there was a reflection twisted and wrong. Her face, once calm and relieved, was now contorted with anguish, her eyes wide and unblinking, as if she had seen something that no human should ever have to see. Her mouth hung open, her lips frozen in a silent scream. The figure stepped forward slowly, deliberately, its movements jerky and unnatural. It was her, yet not her. The light around it flickered and dimmed, as if it were sucking the very energy from the room. The air grew colder, and Sarah's chest tightened with fear. "No," she gasped, her voice weak, her legs trembling. "Please, no." But the figure didn't stop. It kept advancing step after step, its presence overwhelming like a shadow that loomed over her, blotting out the light. Sarah wanted to run, but her legs refused to move. The figure reached out its hand, trembling, its fingers stretching toward her. There was no escape. The door behind the figure creaked, the sound loud in the silence. But Sarah couldn't take her eyes off the twisted reflection of herself. She felt the cold breath of the figure against her skin, its presence chilling her to the bone. She could hear its voice, her own voice, whispering in her ear, a sound that was both familiar and alien. "You can never escape," the figure said, its voice rasping, echoing around her. "You are part of this place, always." Tears welled up in Sarah's eyes as the figure's hand reached for her, its cold fingers grazing her skin. The house was alive, but not in the way she had once thought. It was feeding on her fear, feeding on the last remnants of hope she had held on to. It had always been waiting, always been here, and now it was going to drag her back into its suffocating depths. But Sarah wasn't going to give in. She had fought too hard, had come too far to be consumed again. With a sudden surge of strength, Sarah pulled back the pendant in her hand, glowing faintly, casting a warm, steady light across the room. She couldn't let the darkness take her. Not again. She could feel the light inside her, a spark that hadn't been extinguished. And now it was growing stronger. She pushed forward, her body trembling, but her resolve solid. "No." She whispered fiercely, the words rising from the depths of her soul. "You will not have me. I am free." The figure in front of her faltered its form, beginning to blur its edges, flickering like a flame caught in the wind. The footsteps, the creaking, the pressure, everything began to fade, dissolving like mist in the light. Sarah stepped forward, her breath steady now, her heart calm. The light inside her grew stronger, brighter, pushing back against the shadows that had once controlled her. She wouldn't be a part of the house any longer. She had faced her demons. She had faced the darkness, and now she was free. The figure dissolved into nothingness, vanishing as though it had never been there at all. The whispers died, the weight lifted, and the light around Sarah became pure and untainted. She was standing in the light, and for the first time, she felt truly at peace. There was no more darkness, no more house. There was only freedom. Sarah stood in the light, feeling the warmth of it wrap around her like a blanket on a cold night. The fear that had once held her captive, the dread of the house and its endless whispers, was gone. In its place was peace, deep and true, a stillness she hadn't known for so long. She took a long, steadying breath, feeling the weight of the journey she had been through finally lift from her shoulders. The house, its shadows, its figures, its dark grip was no more. She was free, and yet there was still something lingering in the air, a quiet sense of unease that crept in from the corners of her mind. She felt it now, not from the house itself, but from somewhere deeper, from a place she hadn't yet acknowledged, a place within herself. Her hands, still trembling slightly, went to her chest, to the pendant that had been her constant companion through all of this. She gripped it tightly, as though drawing strength from its solid presence. The light, though warm, still felt too bright, too intense. It was almost as if it were a beacon, one that had drawn her in. But now that she stood at its center, she couldn't help but wonder if it was the only thing keeping her from truly facing the next step. She glanced around. The world she stood in was no longer the dark, oppressive labyrinth of the house. Instead, It was a place of pure, glowing light. There were no walls, no floors, just endless space stretching out in all directions, bathed in a golden glow. It was a place that should have felt safe, comforting, but instead it felt strangely empty, devoid of the familiar hum of life. The echo of the house had been erased, but so too had everything that once made it real. The familiar shapes, the memories of rooms and halls gone. All of it had melted into this strange, ethereal glow. Am I still? Here she whispered, her voice thin in the stillness. Her words seemed to float away, lost in the vast emptiness. It was a question that lingered in the air, heavy with meaning. Where was here? What had she truly escaped? The house may have been gone, but she was now in a space unlike anything she had known before. Something stirred in the depths of her mind, an unspoken thought, a truth she had been too afraid to confront until now. The house had been a reflection, a mirror of her fears, her regrets. It had shown her what she was afraid of losing: her family, her life, her very sense of self. The house had been a manifestation of her pain, but now that it was gone, now that she stood in this bright, disorienting place, Sarah was forced to ask what was left of her, and the answer came slowly creeping in, wrapping around her like the quietest of whispers. I am still here. She hadn't vanished with the house. She hadn't become lost in the shadows, swallowed whole by its grip. She was still Sarah, still human, still the woman who had fought through darkness and terror to find the light. Her chest tightened as the realization hit her. She had faced everything the house had thrown at her. The spirits, the darkness, the house's endless reach. But the one thing she had not yet faced was herself. Her own fear of being alone, of being nothing. The house had been a prison, yes, but it had also been a kind of refuge. A place where her grief had taken root, where her loneliness had festered. She had hidden in it, allowed it to consume her, but no longer. I am still here, she whispered again, louder this time, her voice stronger. The words resonated within her chest, filling her with a quiet strength. She was not the woman who had walked into that house so many years ago. She had grown. She had fought. And she had survived. The light around her began to shift its warmth, turning into something more solid, more grounded. It wasn't just the light anymore. It was the world she had created for herself, the one she was free to build brick by brick from her own strength. The space began to form around her slowly at first, but with increasing clarity. The glowing light rippled and shaped itself into the outline of a room. The walls were soft at first, flickering with light, but as Sarah stepped forward, they solidified, becoming real, becoming part of the world she was now creating. A world where she would no longer be a prisoner to the past, a place where she could shape her future with her own hands. She walked slowly, her feet finding solid ground beneath her, feeling each step as if she were reclaiming her place in the world. The light grew softer, more natural, like the glow of a sunset. The air was fresh, filled with the promise of something new, something alive. She could smell it, the scent of grass, of earth, of freedom. It was a world she could make her own. Her hand reached out and touched the walls, solid, now firm beneath her fingertips. The memories of the house, the darkness, the spirits, they seemed to fade with each step, as though they were never truly hers to carry. The fear, the loss, the grief, it had all been a part of her. Yes, but it was no longer her entire identity. The space before her filled with images, memories of happier days, of moments of joy, laughter, love. The family she had lost now replaced with the promise of what was to come. The future was hers to shape. She could feel it in every part of her, a sense of hope, of strength that pulsed through her with every breath she took. And for the first time in a long while, Sarah smiled. A real smile. One that came from within her, from the very core of who she was. She wasn't running anymore. She wasn't trapped. She was free. Free to live. Free to choose. Free to become whoever she wanted to be. As the light continued to pulse now, a steady, radiant glow, Sarah walked forward, feeling the ground firm beneath her feet. The darkness of the house was behind her now, and ahead of her was a world full of possibilities waiting for her to take the first step. And so she did. As Sarah walked further into the light, the space around her continued to expand, transforming from a mere empty void into a world of infinite possibilities. The boundaries of the room melted away, and soon she found herself standing in a landscape unlike any she had seen before. It was a place of perfect serenity, a meadow bathed in the golden glow of a soft setting sun. The air was crisp yet warm, carrying the scent of wildflowers and fresh grass. A gentle breeze stirred the leaves of distant trees, and the sound of birds singing filled the air with a peaceful harmony. For a moment, Sarah simply stood there, taking it all in. The beauty of this world was overwhelming in its simplicity. The house, the dark, twisted place that had once trapped her, was nothing more than a distant memory, now a shadow fading away as she moved further from it. In its place stood this new, vibrant world, one that was full of hope and light, untouched by the horrors that had once consumed her. But even in this peaceful place, Sarah couldn't escape the weight of the past entirely. She had escaped the house, yes, but what about the shadows within her? The guilt, the grief, the remnants of her fear that still lingered like faint echoes deep within her. She looked down at her hands, the same hands that had once trembled with fear, now steady and calm. She clenched them into fists, feeling the strength within them. She had come so far, had fought so hard, but the battle was never truly over, was it? The house had been a reflection of her pain, a physical manifestation of all the things she had buried. But she knew now that she couldn't outrun them forever. The realization hit her all at once, sharp and clear. It wasn't the house that had held her prisoner, it was herself. The house had been a mirror that reflected the darkest parts of her soul, the grief, the loss, the regret. She had built those walls, those illusions of safety around herself long before she ever set foot in the mansion. The house had merely been a product of her own fears. She closed her eyes, taking a deep breath, the air filling her lungs like a cleansing wave. It was time to face those parts of herself, the parts that had been left behind, hidden in the darkness. The fear that had once held her in a vice grip was still there deep inside her. But now, it wasn't overwhelming. It was manageable. She could face it. She could heal. "I am still here," she whispered, her voice steady, now full of resolve. The words were no longer just a declaration. They were a promise to herself. "I am here." The breeze stirred again, and as Sarah looked up, the trees in the distance seemed to bend toward her, as if welcoming her into their embrace. The landscape around her shimmered, the light growing brighter, more radiant, until it enveloped her completely. It was a light she could no longer fear. It wasn't an illusion. It wasn't a trap. It was the light of her own strength, her own soul shining through the darkness. And in that moment, Sarah realized that she was no longer bound by the past. The house, the spirits, the shadows, they were no longer her chains. She was free, truly free. Free to live, to create, to move forward. She took the first step into the meadow, the grass soft beneath her feet, the earth solid and welcoming. She felt the weight of the past lifting. With each step, she took the pain of her old fears slowly dissolving into the light. The path ahead was uncertain. Yes, there would always be challenges, always be moments where the darkness would try to creep back in. But now Sarah knew that she could face them. She had faced the darkest corners of her soul, and she had emerged stronger, wiser, and more alive than ever before. The world before her was full of promise, full of life, and Sarah was ready to walk it. The past was behind her, the future ahead. The journey was just beginning, and for the first time in years, Sarah felt peace. As Sarah continued to walk, the world around her seemed to shift once more, expanding and evolving with each step she took. The meadow, though peaceful, had begun to transform into something else, something even more beautiful. The soft golden light that bathed everything in warmth grew deeper, richer, casting long shadows that stretched like fingers across the ground. The air was still but filled with a quiet hum, as if the very earth itself was alive, breathing in rhythm with Sarah. With every step she took, she could feel her connection to the world, deepening her presence, blending with the landscape around her. There was no longer a sense of separation between her and this place. She was no longer an outsider, no longer a prisoner of the house or her own fears. She was part of something greater, something timeless and enduring. It was as though she had been reborn in this new world, the weight of her past finally fading away. But even as the light enveloped her, she couldn't escape the feeling that there was something still left to confront. The house, though distant, now still lingered at the edges of her consciousness, its whispers soft, but persistent, like a haunting echo. She knew it wasn't about the house anymore. It was about the lessons she had learned from it, the darkness she had faced, and the strength she had found within herself. Sarah stopped in the middle of the meadow, the golden grass swaying gently around her. She closed her eyes and let the stillness wash over her, letting her body and mind sink with the peace that surrounded her. It was strange, this feeling of calm. It felt like she was both nowhere and everywhere at once. The world had opened up in ways she had never expected. She began to realize that the journey she had taken, both in the house and in the light, was not just about escaping something. It was about finding herself. It was about rediscovering the pieces of her soul that had been lost to the house, to the darkness, to the fears that had consumed her for so long. Those pieces were here now, in the meadow, in the sunlight. They were waiting for her to embrace them. But then something shifted. A subtle vibration ran through the ground beneath her feet. It was soft at first, like the flutter of wings in the distance, but it grew louder, stronger, until the earth seemed to hum beneath her. Her heart skipped a beat. The stillness of the world around her had been broken. She turned her head, searching the horizon, but saw nothing at first. Only the long expanse of the meadow stretching before her, bathed in soft light. And yet something was there. Something was watching, and then she saw it. In the distance, where the light met the darkened edges of the horizon, a figure appeared. It was just a shadow, at first flickering in and out of view, but then it became clearer, darker. It was a silhouette of a figure moving steadily toward her, its outline blending with the fading light. It was tall, dressed in flowing garments that seemed to ripple with each step, as if the wind was alive with the same energy she had felt before. Sarah's pulse quickened, the calm she had embraced slipping into uncertainty once more. The figure was moving slowly, deliberately, its presence unnerving but familiar in a way that unsettled her even more. She took a tentative step backward, her feet heavy in the grass as if something was drawing her toward the figure unwillingly. Was it a memory, a phantom of the past? No, it felt real. It felt alive. And then, as the figure drew closer, Sarah realized with a jolt it was her. But not her. A version of herself, but different. This version was taller, more ethereal, its eyes glowing faintly in the dimming light, the same haunted look Sarah had once seen in her own reflection. The reflection she had feared. The figure's features were distorted in a way that wasn't human, but strangely beautiful, a blending of light and shadow that made Sarah's heart race in her chest. The figure stopped just a few paces away from her, and Sarah felt an overwhelming surge of recognition. It was like looking into a mirror, but the reflection wasn't quite right. She had seen this version of herself before, in the house, in the darkness, in the mirror that had once trapped her. The figure smiled. "You've come so far," it said, its voice gentle but filled with an unmistakable weight. "But you are still running, aren't you?" Sarah shook her head, confusion swirling in her mind. "I'm not running. I'm here. I'm free." The figure's smile widened, but it was not reassuring. It was knowing. You think you are free. You think you've escaped, but you still carry the weight. The shadows are still with you. You haven't confronted them. Not truly. Sarah stepped back, her body tense with unease. "No. I've faced them. I've beaten them. The house, the darkness. It's all behind me." The figure's eyes flickered with a deep sadness, as though it could see through her words into the core of her soul. "You've faced what was outside of you, but you haven't faced what's inside. You haven't faced the part of yourself that still believes it is bound. The house was only a reflection, Sarah, but the truth remains within you." Sarah's breath caught in her throat. This figure, the reflection of herself, was right. She had fought the house. She had battled the darkness and escaped its hold. But the house had always been a mirror of her inner turmoil. And now, standing before her, was the manifestation of everything she had hidden away, the part of her that still believed in the shadows, that still believed in being trapped. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting the figure's words wash over her. Her hand went instinctively to her chest, to the pendant she still wore. She remembered the fear she had once carried with her, the regret that had clung to her like a second skin. The house had been a manifestation of all those fears. But now she could feel the shift. The house was gone, and so too could be the darkness that lingered within her. She opened her eyes, meeting the gaze of the figure. "I am not afraid anymore. I choose to be free." The figure tilted its head slightly, as if considering her words. "Then show me." Without warning, the figure began to dissolve the edges of its form, melting into the air like mist in the morning sun. The light around Sarah grew brighter, more intense. The shadows retreated, and for the first time, she felt whole. She felt herself, truly herself, standing in the light, no longer burdened by the past, no longer haunted by the memories of what had once held her captive. And with that, Sarah knew she had finally faced the truth. She was free. As the figure dissolved into the air, the remnants of its presence lingered for only a moment, like a whisper on the wind. The light around Sarah intensified, becoming not just a source of illumination, but a force of pure clarity and understanding. The meadow around her seemed to hum with life, every blade of grass, every leaf in the trees, each blade of light in the sky moving in harmony with her newfound sense of self. The oppressive shadows that had once seemed so vast and unshakable were gone, leaving behind nothing but open space for growth, for healing, for life. Sarah took a deep breath, inhaling the pure, clean air. She felt a surge of energy course through her, something she had not felt in years. Strength, purpose, clarity. She had spent so long fighting against the darkness, fighting against the house, fighting against her own fears, that she had forgotten what it felt like to be simply alive. Not just alive in the sense of being free from fear, but alive in the sense of feeling whole again, complete. Her hand fell away from the pendant she had worn so long, and for the first time she felt no need to grasp it. It had been a talisman, a reminder of her struggle, her pain. But it no longer defined her. She was no longer the woman who had stumbled into that house broken and unsure. She was someone new now, someone who had walked through fire and emerged not unscathed, but stronger, wiser, and more at peace with who she was. The space around her continued to shift the meadow, transforming into something even more magnificent. The trees grew taller, their branches stretching toward the sky, their leaves shimmering with every breeze. The ground beneath her feet became solid rich, with earth vibrant with life. Flowers bloomed at her touch, their petals unfurling as if responding to the very essence of her presence. It was a world full of potential, full of promise. A world waiting for her to take part in it, to claim her place among the living. She walked through the meadow, no longer hesitant, no longer burdened by the weight of her past. The light followed her, wrapping around her in a soft, constant glow. She could feel the weight of her decisions, of the life she had lived, but they no longer felt heavy. They felt like lessons learned, experiences that had shaped her, but not defined her. She was her own person now, free from the chains of regret and fear. As she walked deeper into the landscape, the horizon opened before her. A path appeared, winding through the golden fields, leading toward something distant but inviting. She didn't know where it led, but it didn't matter. The journey ahead was hers to choose. She smiled to herself, a real smile, the first one she had worn in what felt like forever. It wasn't forced or born from relief. It was simply the smile of someone who had found peace, someone who had found their place in the world. For the first time, Sarah realized that the house, the spirits, the darkness, it was all just a part of her story. A chapter that had been difficult but necessary. She had walked through it, and now it was time to move on. The house had been a reflection of her struggles, yes, but it no longer had a hold on her. It had no power over her anymore. She was free, truly free, and the freedom was hers to shape. The path ahead beckoned, and she stepped forward, her heart light, her spirit unburdened. The world around her was full of infinite possibilities. She wasn't running from the past anymore. She was walking toward the future. The light grew brighter as she moved, illuminating the path that lay ahead. She didn't know where it would take her, but she knew one thing for certain. She would be walking it with purpose, with strength, and with the knowledge that she had already overcome the darkest of days. And as the horizon stretched out before her, Sarah finally understood. The house had never been her enemy. It had been the key to her freedom. Now the journey was hers. As Sarah continued down the path, the scenery around her shifted again, the land ebbing and flowing like a dream, reshaping itself with every step she took. The golden meadows faded into rolling hills, and those hills gently sloped down into a sparkling river that meandered through the landscape, reflecting the light of the setting sun. The air felt alive with possibility, with potential, a promise of something new at every turn. Each step Sarah took felt like an affirmation of the journey she had made, and each breath she drew was deeper, fuller, as if she were finally tasting the world again for the first time. The shadows that had once been so heavy, so suffocating, seemed to evaporate with every step, leaving only a soft, glowing presence in their place. The weight of the past was lifting completely, and she was left with the beautiful clarity of the moment. Sarah paused at the edge of the river, watching the water flow gently by its surface, shimmering with the last rays of the sun. She knelt down, dipping her fingers into the cool water, feeling the liquid slide between her hands like silk. The river, like everything else in this place, felt alive, full of movement and life. It was as though the earth itself was breathing with her, keeping rhythm with her newfound freedom. Her heart swelled, a quiet warmth blooming in her chest. She had always believed that the house, with its twisting hallways, its haunted whispers, its suffocating grip, had been the end of her story. She had always thought it was the defining chapter of her life, the one that would break her. But now, standing by this river, she realized how wrong she had been. The house had been but a moment in time that had shaped her, yes, but it was not her story's end. It had taught her the deepest lessons about strength, about facing fear, about confronting the parts of herself she had been too afraid to acknowledge. It had been a mirror, and she had stared into it long enough to understand herself in ways she never had before. Now, that understanding gave her the power to let go. The house no longer haunted her thoughts, no longer controlled her future. It had served its purpose, and now it was time to live, to move forward. The world before her was hers to shape. The possibilities were endless. As she stood by the river, Sarah took one more moment to reflect on the journey she had made. The tears that had once marked her grief, her fear had long dried, replaced by the steady rhythm of hope. The things she had once feared, the ghosts of the house, the darkness that had shadowed her every step, were now faded memories. Her fears no longer held power over her. It was time to cross the river. Without hesitation, Sarah stepped forward. Her feet sank softly into the cool, clear water, the ripples spreading out around her with every movement. The current was gentle, just enough to keep her moving, but not enough to pull her under. The water, like everything else in this place, was alive with energy, and Sarah felt it fill her as she moved deeper, stepping carefully but confidently into the current. As the river deepened, the banks on either side seemed to stretch further away, but the water remained calm, as if guiding her forward, encouraging her to continue. There were no obstacles here, no hidden dangers, only an open path stretching forward into the unknown. She was no longer afraid, no longer held back by the shadows of her past. When she reached the other side, Sarah stepped out of the water onto the smooth, soft grass. She paused for a moment to look around. The sun was now low on the horizon, casting the sky in rich shades of pink, orange, and purple. It was a sight that filled her with a profound sense of peace, a beauty that seemed to echo the new chapter that was beginning for her. For a long time, Sarah had believed that to truly move forward, she had to forget the past. She had thought that running from her fears was the only way to escape the house's hold. But now, standing at the edge of the river, she understood. Moving forward wasn't about forgetting. It was about accepting, about integrating everything she had learned into the person she had become. She had embraced her fear, her pain, her sorrow, and now she was standing on the other side, not as a broken soul, but as someone whole, someone powerful, someone alive. As the first stars began to twinkle in the sky, Sarah took another step, her heart steady, her mind calm. The journey ahead wasn't clear, but for the first time, she didn't need to see the destination. She had the strength to walk it, to find her way step by step, and as she moved forward, she knew one thing for certain: the house would never define her again. The darkness had been a chapter, but it was now closed. This was her new beginning, and she would embrace it with everything she had. As Sarah continued her walk, the landscape around her seemed to shift, yet again subtly this time, but with a profound sense of purpose. The soft glow of the evening sky began to deepen, and the air took on a cool, crisp quality, a herald of the change to come. The sun had set fully now, leaving only the gentle twinkling of stars above. The path ahead no longer felt so vast, so uncertain. It was solid beneath her feet, comforting in its familiarity. With each step, Sarah felt more grounded. The weight of her past had lifted, and she no longer carried the burdens of guilt, regret, or fear. Instead, she carried a quiet confidence, a sense of purpose. The journey ahead wasn't a challenge to overcome, but an opportunity to create something new. And as she moved, she realized something that took her by surprise. This wasn't an ending at all. It was a beginning. She had walked through the darkest night of her soul and had emerged into a new dawn. The meadow she had crossed, the river she had traversed were not just spaces in this world. They were markers, signposts of her transformation. The house that had once consumed her thoughts and dreams was no more. She had let go of its grip of the ghost it had left in her mind, and now Sarah was walking towards something entirely her own. The night around her was serene, peaceful, and yet full of possibilities. The stars above twinkled, as if beckoning her forward, promising her that there were more wonders to be discovered, more paths to be walked. She didn't know where this path would take her, but that no longer scared her. She had learned that the journey was more important than the destination. She had learned that the only true freedom was to embrace the unknown, to trust that each step would lead her to a place where she was meant to be. And as she walked, the landscape changed again. She found herself in a forest, now the trees towering above her, their trunks thick and strong, their branches reaching up toward the sky. The air here was different, earthy rich with the scent of pine and moss. The sound of leaves rustling in the gentle breeze filled the air, a soft lullaby that calmed her spirit. The path was narrow, winding through the trees, and though she could not see far ahead, she felt no fear. There was no darkness here, no shadows creeping in. This was a place of peace, of quiet growth. For a moment, Sarah stopped taking in the quiet beauty of the forest. She could hear her heartbeat steady and calm in the silence of the woods. The air was cool against her skin, but not uncomfortable. The world around her seemed alive in a way that made her feel connected to everything. The trees, the earth, the very air, she was part of it all. As she stood there, Sarah realized that she wasn't just walking through the world. She was part of the world now. She was alive in a way she had never truly been before. The house had tried to steal that from her, to make her believe that she was trapped, that she was forever bound to the darkness. But now she understood that her freedom had always been hers to claim. It was hers not because she had escaped the house, but because she had finally embraced the light within herself. A soft voice broke through the silence, a whisper in the breeze. "Sarah!" She turned, startled at first, but then the sound washed over her like a gentle wave. It wasn't the same voice she had heard before, the distorted voice of the house. It wasn't a voice of fear or torment. It was the voice of the earth, of the trees, of everything that had grown and flourished in her wake. It was the voice of the world, speaking to her with the tenderness of a long-forgotten dream. "Sarah, you have found your place." The words filled her, and for the first time she understood. The journey she had undertaken had always been about finding herself, about reconnecting with the world around her. It had never been about running away from the house, from the darkness. It had always been about finding the light within, about stepping into the fullness of who she was meant to be. The wind swirled around her, lifting her hair and sending ripples through the trees. The forest responded to her not with fear, but with welcome, as if it had been waiting for her to arrive. And as she looked ahead, the path opened further, stretching into the depths of the forest. It was a path of infinite possibilities, a path that was hers to walk. She smiled softly to herself, her heart light, her spirit whole. She had found her way, and the journey ahead would be hers to create. The house, the darkness, the fear, those things had been her teachers, but now she was free. Free to be who she truly was, free to build a life that was hers, free to walk the path that led to her own destiny. With one last look at the forest that stretched out before her, Sarah took a step forward, feeling the earth beneath her feet, steady and sure. The stars above shone brighter now, their light mingling with the glow of the moon, casting a gentle radiance over the world. She wasn't walking alone. The entire universe was walking with her, and for the first time Sarah felt at peace. The journey had only just begun. Sarah walked deeper into the forest, the soft hum of life all around her. The trees, their trunks thick and rooted deep in the earth, stood as silent sentinels, offering their strength, their wisdom. The path beneath her feet was well worn, yet still full of potential. Each step she took felt more sure, more grounded, as if the earth itself was holding her in its embrace, guiding her toward the unknown. The air was fragrant with the scent of pine and earth, and the sound of leaves rustling in the wind was a gentle melody. It wasn't the eerie silence of the house she had left behind, but a living, breathing silence. It wasn't empty. It was full of possibility, full of the quiet pulse of nature, of time moving forward. Sarah stopped for a moment, her hand resting on a large tree beside her. She closed her eyes and breathed deeply, the cool night air filling her lungs, grounding her. She wasn't running from anything anymore. There were no more ghosts, no more shadows. There was only the present, the world around her, and the quiet knowledge that she was free. She had faced her fears, confronted the darkness inside her, and now she was standing on the other side of it. She opened her eyes and continued walking the path, winding ahead of her, beckoning her forward. There was no urgency now. She wasn't racing to escape anything. She was simply walking, simply being. The beauty of the forest was no longer just a backdrop. It was a part of her journey, a journey that she had chosen to embrace fully. The stars above her shimmered like jewels in the sky, their distant light flickering in time with the rhythm of her own heartbeat. She didn't know where this path would lead, but she no longer feared the unknown. The journey itself, with all its twists and turns, was what mattered now. She had learned that the destination was not the most important thing. It was the moments, the steps, the choices she made along the way that would shape her future. As she walked, the trees began to thin, and the sound of a bubbling stream reached her ears. The forest opened up, and she found herself standing at the edge of a clearing. In the center of the clearing was a small pond, its surface smooth and reflective. The moonlight bathed the water in a silvery glow, and the ripples created by a gentle breeze danced across its surface. Sarah walked toward the pond, drawn to it by some quiet instinct. As she reached the water's edge, she knelt down her reflection, gazing back at her. But this time, she wasn't afraid. She saw the woman she had become, strong, resilient, at peace. The eyes that stared back at her were no longer filled with fear or regret. They were filled with acceptance, with clarity. She had faced her past, had walked through the darkness, and now she was standing in the light of her own truth. She smiled at her reflection, a soft, knowing smile. She wasn't perfect. She would never be perfect. But she was whole. She was alive. And that was enough. A gentle wind stirred the trees, and Sarah stood up, turning away from the pond. The moonlight illuminated the clearing, casting a soft glow on everything around her. She had made it here not just to this place, but to this moment. She had overcome the shadows, the fears, and had found herself standing in the light, in the peace that she had been searching for all along. With one last look at the pond, Sarah began to walk again, her steps slow and steady, but filled with purpose. She wasn't running from the past anymore. She was moving forward toward a future that she would create with her own hands, with her own strength. The journey had no end. It was a continuous unfolding, and she was ready for whatever came next. The forest, the stars, the moon, all of it seemed to open up before her, the path stretching out into infinity, full of promise, full of life. And for the first time in a long while, Sarah felt the quiet certainty that the future was hers to shape. With each step, she was no longer bound by the past, by the house, by the darkness that had once threatened to consume her. She was free, truly free, and as she walked into the night, Sarah knew that the journey ahead, whatever it held, would be hers to experience, to embrace, and to live fully. The light of the moon bathed her path, and Sarah walked on with no more fear, only the soft pulse of life carrying her forward. As Sarah walked deeper into the forest, the landscape shifted once more. The path before her, once clear and well-defined, began to widen and branch off in different directions, each fork offering its own path, its own possibility. It was a quiet, still moment, the kind where time felt suspended, and every step seemed to lead her deeper into herself as much as it did into the world around her. The air, now cool and crisp with the promise of dawn, filled her lungs with each breath, and for the first time in years, Sarah felt truly grounded. The weight that had burdened her for so long, the house, the fear, the guilt, was gone. It had faded with each step, each choice she had made to move forward, to release the past. She felt as though she had shed an old skin, the last remnants of the woman who had been trapped by the darkness, by the house, by her own fears. She paused for a moment, taking in her surroundings. The trees around her seemed to stretch higher, their branches reaching toward the sky like ancient, wise hands. The moon hung low, casting long shadows over the clearing, but there was nothing threatening about them. They were merely part of the landscape like everything else in this peaceful world. She had always feared what the darkness might bring, what it might reveal about her. But now she understood. The darkness wasn't something to be feared. It was simply a part of the whole, a contrast to the light, a balance to the peace. She had lived in the shadows for so long, and now she could step into the light without fear. The past no longer had the power to define her. As Sarah walked forward, she felt the pull of something greater than herself. The path ahead was still uncertain, but it no longer filled her with dread. She had come to understand that the unknown was not something to fear, it was simply something to embrace. The world was full of infinite possibilities, and she was no longer afraid of what lay ahead. She was no longer running from the past. She was choosing to move forward. The world around her seemed to shift again, this time more gently. The trees parted, and Sarah found herself standing at the edge of a vast meadow. The sky was dark, but the first light of dawn was beginning to creep over the horizon, painting the sky in shades of violet and pink. The meadow stretched before her, bathed in soft light, a new beginning unfolding with each passing second. And there at the far end of the meadow stood a figure. At first, Sarah hesitated, her heart fluttering in her chest. But as she looked closer, she recognized the figure. It was not the twisted reflection she had seen in the mirror, not the house's distorted image of herself. No, this was someone else. A figure of light standing tall and serene in the midst of the field. The person radiated calm peace, a warmth that felt familiar, yet new. Sarah took a step forward, drawn by an instinct she couldn't explain, and with each step, the figure grew clearer, more defined. It was as if the figure had been waiting for her, as if they had known she would come to this place at this moment. When Sarah was close enough, the figure smiled a gentle, knowing smile that seemed to carry all the wisdom of the world. There was no fear, no shadow in their eyes, just understanding. "You've made it," the figure said softly, their voice like a breeze on the water. "You've walked the path of the darkness and the light, and you have come to find your own way." Sarah nodded, feeling the words settle in her chest. She had come so far. She had walked through her fears, through the house, through her own doubts. And now she was standing here in the light, free from the past. She was whole. The figure took a step forward, their presence radiating peace. They reached out a hand to Sarah, not as a force to pull her forward, but as an invitation. Sarah hesitated only for a moment before she took it, her fingers brushing against the warmth of the figure's hand. It felt like the warmth of the sun on her face after a long winter, a gentle reminder that she was not alone. "Are you ready?" the figure asked, their voice calm and serene. "Are you ready to move forward?" Sarah stood there for a moment, feeling the weight of the question. She had been through so much darkness, so much uncertainty. But now, standing in the light, she realized that the true journey was just beginning. It wasn't about running away from the past anymore. It was about moving toward the future, with an open heart, with strength, and with acceptance. She smiled, her heart light. "I am." And with that, the figure stepped aside, allowing her to pass to move into the next phase of her journey. Sarah took her first step into the meadow. The grass beneath her feet, soft and alive, the air filled with the scent of flowers. As she walked, the light grew brighter, the world around her coming alive, with color, warmth, and life. The path ahead was still unknown, but she wasn't afraid. She wasn't running anymore. The journey had come full circle. The house, the shadows, the fear, they were no longer a part of her. They had shaped her, yes, but they no longer held power over her. Sarah was free, truly free. And as she moved forward, she knew that she would create the life she wanted, one step at a time, one choice at a time. The future was hers to shape. The meadow stretched out endlessly before Sarah bathed in the gentle light of dawn. The path beneath her feet felt solid and real, the earth supporting her with each step she took. The air was crisp, fresh, and vibrant, alive with the sounds of the world, waking up birds singing in the trees, the soft rustle of the wind through the grass, the distant murmur of a stream flowing nearby. As she walked, the uncertainty that had once gripped her began to fade. Each step she took was a reminder that she was no longer running from anything. She was simply walking toward what was meant for her. The journey ahead, while unknown, was now something she embraced, not with fear, but with quiet anticipation. She was no longer trapped by the shadows of her past. She was moving forward free, her gaze lifted to the horizon, where the sun was slowly rising, its warm light spilling across the sky in hues of gold and pink. It was a new day, not just in the world around her, but in her life. She had walked through the darkest of nights, the house, the whispers, the fear. But now all of that was behind her. It had shaped her, yes, but it no longer defined her. The freedom she felt was real, and she was ready to claim it. The path ahead twisted slightly, leading her into a forest at the edge of the meadow. The trees were tall and welcoming, their leaves shimmering with the soft breeze. It was an inviting place, one that seemed to pulse with life, with energy. The forest felt like an extension of the meadow, another chapter of her journey, another phase of the world that was waiting for her to explore. As she entered the forest, the sound of her footsteps on the soft earth was the only sound. The air was thick with the scent of pine and damp soil. the light of the sun filtered through the canopy above, casting dappled patterns on the forest floor. She stopped for a moment, closed her eyes, and breathed deeply, feeling the serenity of the place seep into her soul. This was peace, true, deep peace. The path curved gently, and ahead of her she could see a small clearing. There was a bench there, old but sturdy, placed beneath a massive oak tree. It seemed like a perfect spot to rest, to reflect. But more than that, it felt like a place of choice, a place where Sarah could sit, breathe, and decide what came next. As she approached the bench, she realized that she wasn't in any rush. She had spent so long running, so long fighting against forces she could not control, that now, in this moment, she realized she had the power to decide her pace. She didn't have to rush forward anymore. There was no destination waiting to trap her. She was already here. She sat on the bench, resting her hands in her lap, her eyes gazing at the sunlight filtering through the leaves. For the first time in a long time, Sarah felt the quiet presence of herself. She was no longer fragmented. She was whole. There had been so many moments when she had doubted herself, moments when she had wondered if she was truly worthy of peace, of freedom, of happiness. The house, the darkness, it had whispered lies to her, telling her she was weak, telling her she was lost. But now, in the light of this new world, she understood the truth. The power to shape her future had always been within her. The house had never been the source of her pain. It had been the catalyst that had revealed what she was capable of. She had faced her deepest fears, confronted the parts of herself she had tried to hide. And now she was free to live without the weight of those fears dragging her down. The past was part of her story, but it didn't control her anymore. She had learned to let go. And that was the greatest gift she could give herself. Sarah looked up, and as her gaze wandered across the clearing, she saw something that made her heart skip a beat. At the edge of the trees where the light met the shadows, she saw a figure. It was not a specter of the house, not a shadow of her past. No, this figure was different. It was familiar. It was real. Her heart raced as the figure stepped forward, and as it emerged into the light, Sarah recognized it instantly. It was a younger version of herself, standing tall and unburdened by fear, her face full of hope and possibility. The younger version of Sarah smiled at her, and for a moment Sarah felt as though she were looking at her own reflection. But this time, it wasn't twisted or distorted. It was her whole, confident and alive. It was the woman she had always been, deep inside the one who had been buried under layers of doubt, of fear, of regret. "I see you," the younger version of herself said, her voice soft but strong. "You've made it. You've found your way. I've always been here waiting for you to come back to me." Sarah stood, her legs a little unsteady, but her heart open. She stepped toward the younger version of herself, her hand reaching out, and as their fingers touched, she felt a surge of warmth flood through her. It was a connection that went beyond time, beyond space. It was the connection to her true self, the self that had never been lost but simply forgotten. "I was always here," Sarah whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I just had to remember." The younger version smiled, a radiant, knowing smile. "And now you do." For a moment there was nothing but the soft sound of the breeze, the rustling of leaves, and the peaceful silence of the forest. Sarah felt complete, her heart full. This was the life she was meant to live, the one she had been searching for all along. It wasn't a life without challenges or struggles, but it was a life she was ready to face with strength and grace. The younger version of Sarah turned and gestured toward the path ahead, which now seemed clearer, more defined. "The journey is still yours to walk," she said, her voice full of encouragement. "But you're never alone. You are always with yourself." With that, the figure of the younger Sarah faded into the light, leaving Sarah standing in the clearing, but somehow feeling more whole than ever before. She knew the path ahead was hers to walk slowly with purpose, and with the quiet confidence that she could handle whatever came next. With one final glance at the path ahead, Sarah stepped forward, her heart light and her mind at peace. The journey continued, and for the first time she wasn't afraid of what lay ahead. Sarah continued her walk the path ahead, unfolding like a story waiting to be written. The forest with its towering trees and dappled sunlight whispered of new beginnings of chapters yet to come. The world around her felt alive, and she was part of it. Every step she took was a step toward the unknown, but this time it didn't feel like an uncertain journey. She didn't feel lost anymore. She was walking with purpose, with her heart open to whatever came next. The last remnants of her past, the house, the darkness, the fear were fading, growing more distant with each step she took. They had shaped her, yes, but they no longer defined her. Sarah had come to understand that the most powerful part of the journey was not the destination, but the ability to move forward, to keep walking, no matter what obstacles appeared along the way. The forest gave way to a wide open field, the grass swaying gently in the breeze. The sky above was clear and endless, the soft hues of twilight casting a peaceful glow over everything. In the distance, she could see a range of mountains, their peaks still capped with snow, a reminder of the beauty and the challenges the world had to offer. The road ahead was wide and inviting, and though she couldn't see what lay beyond the horizon, Sarah felt no fear. She was no longer running from her past, from the darkness, from the house. She was moving forward, embracing the light that was now within her. The weight had lifted. The ghosts had vanished. The house was gone, its hold on her broken. And now there was only the present and the future, both of which were hers to shape. As Sarah walked, the air grew cooler, the sky darkening to a rich indigo. The stars began to appear one by one, twinkling above like distant beacons of light. They reminded her of the journey she had taken the countless nights when she had lain awake, staring into the darkness, wondering if she would ever be free. And now she was. The journey had brought her here to this moment of peace, of clarity. She had found her way. She stopped for a moment to rest on a large rock by the side of the path. The sound of a distant stream reached her ears, its steady rush of water calming, soothing. She closed her eyes for a moment, taking in the sounds of nature, the soft whisper of the wind through the trees, the rhythm of life continuing all around her. This was the world she had been searching for, a world not without its struggles, but one in which she could be herself, unafraid, unburdened. Sarah opened her eyes, and as she gazed at the stars above, a realization settled within her. She wasn't just free from the house. She was free from the need to be perfect. She had spent so much of her life trying to escape the shadows, trying to outrun her fears. But now she understood that she didn't need to escape them. She didn't need to run. She could walk through them, move alongside them, and still remain whole. The house had been a mirror of her deepest fears, but it had also shown her the strength she possessed within herself. The figure in the meadow had been a reflection of her own growth, of the woman she had become. And now, standing in the stillness of the night, she realized that she had found peace, not because the darkness had disappeared, but because she had learned how to exist in the light without fear. Sarah stood up, taking one final look at the clearing around her. She had reached a new beginning, and while she didn't know exactly what lay ahead, she knew that she was ready. The world was vast, full of wonders and challenges, but she no longer felt small in it. She felt capable, strong, and most importantly, at peace with herself. With a deep breath, Sarah stepped back onto the path, the soft glow of the moonlight guiding her way. There was no more running. There was only walking forward into the unknown. The future awaited, but she was ready, and with that, she continued her journey, her heart light, her mind free. As Sarah continued down the path, the forest began to open up once more, revealing an expansive meadow stretching far beyond what she could see. The tall grasses swayed gently in the breeze, and the sky above shifted into a rich tapestry of stars, sparkling with the quiet serenity of the night. The moon hung low, casting a soft, ethereal glow over the land, illuminating everything in a pale light that made the world look almost dreamlike. With each step, Sarah felt more and more at peace. The past, with its shadows and its fears, felt like a distant memory. She'd made her peace with it. She had walked through the storm, and now she was standing in the calm. There was no urgency, no pressure. She could simply exist in this moment, in this beautiful, peaceful world she had found. The wind carried a soft fragrance, sweet and earthy, of wildflowers and fresh pine. The air was crisp, but not biting, and Sarah felt the light chill of the night against her skin. It was refreshing, grounding. She was alive, truly alive, and the realization sent a warm ripple through her chest. This was not the world of the house of dark corridors and endless doors. This was the world she had always been meant to be a part of, a world full of life, full of light, full of hope. She walked further into the meadow, letting her feet sink into the soft grass. The ground beneath her felt solid, real, as though it were welcoming her to this new life, this new chapter. She paused for a moment, looking out across the vast expanse of the meadow. It stretched endlessly before her, the gentle undulations of the earth curving softly into the distance. And then she heard something, a soft rustling sound coming from beyond the meadow, from the edge of the trees. It was a sound so gentle, so quiet, that she almost didn't notice it at first. But there was something in the rhythm of the sound that felt familiar, something that made her pause and listen more closely. As she turned, a figure emerged from the shadows of the forest. At first, it was just a silhouette, dark against the light of the moon. But as it drew closer, Sarah saw it clearly. It was a person walking slowly toward her, their movements calm and deliberate, as though they knew exactly where they were going. For a moment, Sarah felt a flutter of uncertainty, a fleeting whisper of old fears. But then she recognized the figure, and the anxiety that had briefly risen within her melted away. It was not the house that had returned. It was someone else, someone familiar, someone she had not seen in what felt like a lifetime. It was her father. He smiled at her as he approached, his face calm, kind. There was no sadness in his eyes, no shadow of regret, only warmth, only love. He was exactly as she remembered him, the same gentle presence, the same reassuring smile that had always been there for her, even when she was lost, even when the world seemed so uncertain. "Sarah," he said softly, his voice a quiet balm to her heart. "You've come so far." Tears pricked at the corners of her eyes, though they were not tears of sorrow. They were tears of release, of peace. She had carried so much with her for so long, so many regrets, so many unspoken words. But now, in this moment, with him standing before her, it was as though everything that had weighed her down was finally being lifted. "I thought I had lost you," Sarah whispered, her voice trembling. "I thought I would never find my way again." Her father's smile deepened, and he stepped closer, his hand reaching out to rest gently on her shoulder. You never lost your way, Sarah. You just had to find it within yourself. His words were simple, but they carried the weight of a lifetime of wisdom. She had spent so long searching for answers outside of herself, for validation from the world, from the house. But the truth had always been there waiting for her to see it. The power to heal, to move forward, to embrace her own freedom. It had always been within her. "I'm not afraid anymore," she said, her voice steady, now filled with the quiet strength she had finally found. Her father nodded, his eyes filled with pride. "You faced the darkness and walked into the light. You've done the hardest thing of all, Sarah. You've embraced yourself." As he spoke, Sarah felt a rush of emotion sweep through her, but this time it was not fear or sadness. It was a deep, profound gratitude for everything she had experienced, for the struggles that had shaped her into the woman she had become, and for the journey ahead, a journey that was no longer defined by the past, but by the choices she would make, the life she would create. She hugged him tightly, feeling the warmth of his presence envelop her, a comfort she hadn't known she had needed. For a moment, there were no words, only the quiet connection between them. She felt whole, truly whole, for the first time in so long. "I love you, Dad," she whispered, her voice filled with tenderness. "I love you too, Sarah," he replied softly, "and I always will." As they stood together in the meadow, the world around them seemed to glow brighter, as if the very earth itself was celebrating the peace they had found. The path before Sarah was still uncertain, still full of mysteries, but it no longer filled her with dread. She was not walking it alone. And for the first time, she could see that the journey ahead was not something to fear, but something to embrace with open arms. She let go of her father's embrace, and he stepped back, his eyes filled with the same quiet understanding. "The road is yours to walk now, Sarah. But remember, you are never alone. You carry the love, the lessons, and the strength of everyone who has ever walked beside you." Sarah smiled through her tears, her heart full. She took a deep breath, the air sweet and full of promise, and looked ahead. The path stretched out before her, winding through the meadow and beyond toward the mountains in the distance. She didn't know where it would lead, but it didn't matter. She was ready. With a final, lingering look at her father, Sarah turned toward the horizon and took her first step forward. And as she walked, she knew this was only the beginning. Sarah walked forward the path, stretching out ahead of her like a canvas awaiting her next move. The meadow around her hummed with life, the soft rustling of grass beneath her feet in rhythm with the quiet beat of her heart. Each step she took felt lighter than the last, as though the weight of her past, of all the fears and doubts that had clung to her, was finally lifting. The world around her seemed to open up, offering her space, offering her time. She glanced back at the figure of her father standing still and watching her from the edge of the forest. His figure was faint now, fading into the golden hues of the twilight. But the peace in his eyes, the silent understanding that had passed between them, remained. He was a part of her, a part of this journey, but it was her time now, her time to live, to choose to walk the path that lay ahead. She didn't need to look back anymore. Her journey was forward. The soft breeze carried with it the scent of wildflowers, their vibrant colors spilling out across the meadow. The sky above had deepened into the blue of evening, the stars beginning to twinkle softly in the distance, each one like a reminder that the universe was vast and full of endless possibilities. For so long, Sarah had believed that freedom was something to be fought, for something to be earned. But now, standing in the middle of this open world, she realized that freedom was not a destination. It was the choice to move forward, to embrace the present and the future with an open heart. She had always thought that escaping the house the darkness, the fear would set her free. But now she understood that freedom came from facing those very things, from accepting them, and then walking beyond them. The road ahead was not without its challenges. The world was not perfect. It never had been, and it never would be. But it was hers to navigate now, and she could walk it in her own time, at her own pace. The future was no longer something to fear, it was something to create. With each step, she was building the life she had longed for, a life that wasn't bound by the house, by the past, by the shadows. Sarah continued walking, her heart steady, her mind clear. The stars above her guided her, not with the promise of certainty, but with the quiet assurance that she was never truly alone. The universe in all its vastness had a place for her, a place for every soul to grow, to heal, to find peace. She didn't need the answers to everything right now. She didn't need to know what lay around the next bend in the road. She didn't need to have it all figured out. What mattered was that she was free to walk her path, free to make her choices, free to be herself. And for the first time in her life, that was enough. Ahead, the path led into a grove of trees, the soft light from the stars illuminating the way. The air was fresh and inviting, and the sound of water trickling from a nearby stream filled the night with a soothing melody. It was a reminder that life was simple, beautiful in its natural flow, and that even in the most uncertain of times, there was peace to be found in simply being. Sarah stepped forward once again, the cool grass brushing against her feet, the gentle hum of life around her, keeping her grounded. She knew there would be moments ahead that would test her, moments of doubt, of fear, but she also knew that she had the strength to face them, the wisdom to walk through them without being consumed by them. She had learned to embrace the light within herself, the light that had always been there, waiting for her to recognize it. And now, with each step she took, that light grew brighter, not because the world around her had changed, but because she had. Sarah didn't need to search for her way anymore. She was already walking it. With each step, the path unfolded beneath her feet, like the pages of a story she had yet to fully write. The beauty of it was in the uncertainty, the endless possibilities that lay ahead. And as Sarah walked deeper into the night, the stars above her seeming to guide her steps, she knew one thing for sure: the journey was hers. The journey was always hers. Sarah continued her walk under the starlit sky, the quiet hum of the world around her grounding her every step. The road stretched out endlessly, the unknown before her, no longer a cause for fear, but a canvas for whatever she chose to create. She didn't know exactly where the path would lead, nor did she feel the need to know. For the first time, the uncertainty of the future was not daunting. It was liberating. The breeze swirled through the trees, sending the leaves into a soft dance. The stars above glittered like 1,000 distant beacons, each one a reminder of the infinite possibilities awaiting her. It was as though the universe itself had conspired to guide her, to offer her this moment of clarity and peace. The sounds of the forest, gentle whispers of the wind, the rustling of the trees, the distant call of an owl were no longer unsettling. They were a symphony of life, of the world moving around her, and she was a part of it. She felt no more separation between herself and the world. The house, the fear, the isolation, they were all distant echoes now, their voices barely a murmur in the back of her mind. Her hand instinctively reached for the pendant around her neck, a small gesture of reassurance. The pendant had once represented the weight of her past, a constant reminder of the woman she had been. But now, it was just a piece of her, a piece that she carried forward, part of the journey, part of her story. She wasn't running from it. She was walking beside it. Ahead, the path curved gently, leading her toward a place where the trees opened up, to reveal a vast, tranquil lake. The moon hung high above, casting its silver light over the water, making it shimmer like a sheet of glass. The stillness of the lake was both calming and profound. There was a deep peace here, a stillness that invited reflection. Sarah stepped closer to the water, her feet light as she approached the shore. She crouched down, her fingers skimming the surface, sending small ripples across the still water. She watched as the ripples spread out their gentle waves, dissipating into nothingness. It reminded her of her own journey. All the struggles, the pain, the fear, each one had created ripples. But with time they had faded, leaving behind only the calm of the present moment. The water reflected the night sky, the stars dancing on its surface, a mirror of the universe above. Sarah gazed at her reflection for a moment, the woman who had walked through the darkest of times, who had faced the shadows and the uncertainty, and who now stood in the quiet light of her own peace. She saw strength in her reflection, resilience in her eyes. The darkness had shaped her, but it had not broken her. She had learned from it, had grown, and now she stood in the light, whole, complete. She had embraced her past, walked through her fears, and emerged stronger than she had ever believed possible. "I am here," she whispered the words, not just to the reflection in the water, but to herself. "I am here, and I am enough." The moonlight seemed to shine brighter in response, the world around her, growing softer, gentler, as if the universe itself was acknowledging her truth. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was living. And that was enough. She stood up and looked around, her heart steady. The journey ahead was unknown, but she didn't need to know all the answers. She had walked through the darkest parts of herself and emerged stronger. She was ready for whatever came next. She didn't need to fear the future, because she was already living in the present, fully, completely. The path before her was wide and open. There were no more shadows lurking, no more doors to be locked, no more spirals of fear pulling her under. There was only the quiet promise of new beginnings, the gentle pull of the life waiting for her to embrace it. She turned away from the lake, her steps lighter than they had ever been, as if the world was holding her, supporting her, urging her forward. The moon still hung in the sky, casting its light on her path, and Sarah knew that no matter what lay ahead, she would face it with the same strength, the same quiet resolve that had brought her here. With each step she took, she knew she was no longer the woman she had been. She was someone new, someone whole, someone free. The journey was hers to walk, and for the first time, Sarah felt like she was exactly where she was meant to be. The soft, rhythmic sound of Sarah's footsteps was the only thing that filled the air as she walked further along the path. The world around her seemed to breathe, and in every step she felt more and more connected to it. The trees whispered secrets to each other, their leaves rustling in the cool breeze that carried the scent of pine and fresh earth. The night was peaceful, full of stillness and quiet, but also alive with the promise of new things to come. She had always thought that peace was something she would have to fight for, something she could only achieve after overcoming a battle. But now, standing in the heart of this untouched world, she realized that peace had always been within her. The house, the darkness, the fear, they had taught her something essential, something that could never be taken from her, that peace came not from escaping the darkness, but from accepting it and choosing to live in the light. The path ahead of her opened up into another meadow, this one even more expansive than the last. The stars above seemed to grow brighter, more vivid, their light shimmering like diamonds scattered across the sky. The moon, full and luminous, bathed everything below in a soft, silvery glow. The world felt endless, full of potential, a vast, open space where anything could happen. For a moment, Sarah stopped in the center of the meadow, allowing the beauty around her to wash over her. She had come so far, faced so much, but now there was nothing but calm. No pressure, no expectations. Just the serenity of the moment, the fullness of the world around her. It was a rare gift, and she reveled in it. But as she stood there, something tugged at her heart. She looked up at the night sky, her gaze drifting over the constellations, each one so distant and yet so close, each one a reminder of how vast the universe was, how small and yet significant each life was within it. And in that moment, Sarah understood something deeper, that even in the quiet peace of the meadow, even in the light of the stars, there was always room for more. More growth, more understanding, more life. Her journey was not over. It had only just begun. The path before her stretched on, leading toward a distant ridge that seemed to rise toward the heavens where the stars were closest. She felt an unspoken pull toward it, a quiet invitation to continue her journey. The idea of moving forward no longer felt daunting. It felt natural, as if she had been waiting for this moment her entire life. Without hesitation, she took the first step forward, her feet sinking softly into the earth beneath her. The meadow opened up ahead of her, and as she walked, the air seemed to shift, becoming warmer, filled with the rich scent of flowers and new life. She wasn't sure what lay ahead, but that no longer mattered. What mattered was the now, the peace she had found, the strength she had discovered within herself, and the quiet certainty that no matter what came next, she would be ready. The journey ahead was hers to create one step at a time. As Sarah moved toward the ridge, the sound of her footsteps faded into the vastness of the world around her. The stars above, the gentle pull of the wind, the soft hum of the earth beneath her feet, all of it seemed to guide her forward. And with every step, Sarah knew she was not just walking through a meadow or a forest. She was walking into her future, one that was full of endless possibilities and quiet triumphs. The house, the darkness, the fear, they were all behind her. She had faced them. She had embraced them. And now she was free to walk in the light, free to live in the truth of who she was, of who she had become. The night stretched before her vast and open, as if the universe itself was waiting for her to take her place in it. And Sarah, with her heart light and her spirit steady, took that step. As Sarah walked toward the ridge, her every step felt more in tune with the rhythm of the earth beneath her. The quiet sound of her footsteps was the only thing that accompanied her in the stillness of the night. The stars above shone brighter now, as if the universe itself was drawing her closer, encouraging her to keep moving forward. The air was filled with a sense of endless possibility, and Sarah couldn't help but smile softly to herself. She had come so far, and now standing at the edge of this vast world, she felt more connected to it than ever before. The meadow behind her seemed like a distant memory, now a place that had marked the beginning of her journey. The path ahead, winding and uncertain, was no longer something to fear. Each step was a new beginning, a new chapter in the story of her life. She had shed the weight of her past, the house, the darkness, the fears, and now she was free. Free to walk into the unknown, with no more hesitation, no more doubt. The ridge was getting closer, its silhouette against the sky like a distant mountain peak beckoning her toward it. Sarah could feel the pull of it, like an unspoken invitation. She wasn't sure what lay beyond, but the journey toward it felt right. It felt like the next step, the next phase of her life unfolding before her. The breeze picked up a soft whisper in the air, and for a moment, Sarah felt the presence of something ancient, something timeless. It wasn't a presence of fear, but one of wisdom. It was as if the very earth was speaking to her, offering its quiet guidance, telling her that this path was hers to walk, and she would never have to walk it alone. She reached the edge of the ridge and paused for a moment, taking in the view before her. The landscape stretched out vast and open, bathed in the soft light of the moon. The valley below was filled with a river that sparkled in the distance, winding its way through the terrain like a silver ribbon. The mountains in the far distance stood tall and proud, their peaks bathed in the light of the stars. It was a breathtaking sight, one that made her heart swell with a sense of awe and gratitude. She could feel the cool night air on her face, and for the first time in a long while, she felt no fear of what was to come. The future, with all its uncertainties, no longer seemed like something to dread. It was a blank canvas, a story waiting to be written, and Sarah, with her heart full of hope and determination, was ready to write it. As she stood there looking out over the vast world before her, she realized that the journey had never been about reaching a specific destination. It had been about the choices she made along the way, the courage to keep moving forward, even when the road was unclear. She had walked through the darkness, had faced her fears, and had emerged stronger. Now, with each step, she was creating the life she had always dreamed of. The breeze whispered through the trees, and Sarah took a deep breath, feeling the cool air fill her lungs. She closed her eyes for a moment, savoring the peace of the moment. She wasn't running anymore. She wasn't hiding. She was simply being. And for the first time, that was enough. When she opened her eyes, she smiled, the warmth of the moonlight reflecting in her gaze. She had walked this far, and now there was only one thing left to do: keep walking. The road ahead was hers to choose, and with each step, she would create her own path. And as Sarah began walking again, the path stretching out before her, she knew that the journey would continue, as it always does. One step, one breath, one moment at a time. And for the first time, she felt certain that she was exactly where she was meant to be. The night air seemed to carry a deeper stillness now, as though the earth itself was holding its breath, waiting for something. Sarah continued walking along the ridge, each step deliberate, each breath steady. The stars above her twinkled brightly, their light reflecting off the soft sheen of the river far below, their brilliance like tiny beacons guiding her forward. There was no rush, no sense of urgency, just the quiet hum of life around her, the steady rhythm of her own heartbeat. As she walked, her mind drifted back to everything she had been through: the house, the shadows, the fear, and how all of it had shaped her. But it no longer consumed her. She had faced it, accepted it, and now it had become part of her past. No longer something to run from, but something to learn from, something that had made her stronger, wiser. The darkness had always been a part of the journey, but now it was just a shadow receding into the distance as she walked toward the light. The trees around her were thick with leaves, their branches swaying gently in the breeze, casting long, soft shadows across the ground. She reached up to touch the rough bark of a nearby tree, feeling the ancient pulse of life within it, the steady strength that had withstood centuries. The tree was still here, just as she was. There was no end to this cycle of life, no true finish line. It was all a constant unfolding, a path that was always becoming, always changing. In the distance, the first light of dawn was beginning to break, a soft glow creeping over the horizon. The stars were slowly fading, their brilliance giving way to the soft, golden light of morning. The world around her began to take on new colors, subtle hues of pink and gold, of lavender and soft blue. It was the quiet moment between night and day, a moment that felt suspended in time, as though the world itself was waiting for the first breath of a new beginning. Sarah paused at the crest of the ridge, looking out across the valley below. The river sparkled in the early light, its waters glistening like silver. The mountains in the distance stood tall and proud, their peaks bathed in the first rays of the sun. The valley below was vast, open, full of possibility. It was a world waiting to be explored, a world where Sarah could finally make her mark, where she could continue her journey in a way that felt authentic, true to herself. She took a deep breath, the cool morning air filling her lungs, and for a moment she simply stood there, absorbing the beauty of it all. The weight of the past, the house, the darkness, the fear was gone. It had no place here. There was only the present, only the future, and the quiet promise that Sarah had the strength to walk through it, no matter what came her way. She smiled softly, a sense of peace settling in her chest. It wasn't a grand, sweeping realization. It was a quiet knowing. The journey was hers to walk, and she didn't need to have it all figured out. She didn't need to know where the road would lead, only that it was hers, and that she would walk it with purpose, with strength, with open arms. And so, with the first light of day shining on her path, Sarah took a step forward, feeling the earth beneath her feet, grounding her once again. The world around her had awakened, and she had awakened with it. The journey was just beginning, and she was ready. There would be challenges ahead. There would be moments of doubt, moments where the shadows of her past might try to creep back in. But she knew now that she could face them, that she could keep moving forward. The house was no longer her prison. The darkness no longer had power over her. She was free, truly free to embrace the life she was meant to live. Sarah took another step, and then another. The path ahead was wide and open, and she walked toward it, not in haste, but with a quiet confidence that she had earned through everything she had faced. The world was hers to explore, to create, to shape, and for the first time in her life, Sarah knew that she was exactly where she was supposed to be. The morning light poured over the valley, bathing the landscape in a warm, golden glow. The sun had fully risen now, casting long rays across the open meadow, where the wildflowers seemed to sway in response, as if they too were stretching toward the new day. The world around Sarah was alive, humming with energy, and she could feel it in her bones. Each step she took felt lighter, as though the ground beneath her feet was supporting her in a way that felt deeper than simply physical. It was as if she was in perfect harmony with the world. She moved forward slowly, her pace steady, taking in the beauty of her surroundings. There were birds chirping above her, their songs filling the air with melody. The distant rustle of the wind in the trees was like a soft whisper, comforting in its familiarity. It was a sound she had grown to associate with peace, a kind of natural rhythm that had always been there, waiting for her to find it. Sarah stopped for a moment to breathe in the cool air, letting the fresh scent of earth and morning dew fill her lungs. She closed her eyes for a brief instant, simply being, just letting the world wash over her. It was a profound sense of stillness, a feeling of being grounded and connected, and for once she didn't feel the need to rush. The world was unfolding before her, and she had all the time she needed. She opened her eyes and looked ahead. The path was still there, winding toward the mountains in the distance. The path didn't need to be clear. She didn't need to know every turn, every challenge that might arise. She was walking toward it with an open heart, trusting that the way would reveal itself in time. The future was unwritten, and that was precisely the way it was supposed to be. The uncertainty no longer frightened her. It had become part of the adventure, part of the journey. With each step, she embraced the freedom that came from not knowing, from letting go of the need to control everything. It wasn't that she didn't care about the future. It was that she understood that life was more than what lay ahead. It was about the choices she made in the moment, the way she moved through each experience, how she allowed herself to grow with the world around her. The path led her up toward the foothills of the mountains, where the terrain became a little more rugged, the ground beneath her feet uneven. But the difficulty didn't deter her. If anything, it felt invigorating. The challenges she faced now felt like opportunities to test the strength she had cultivated, the resilience she had developed. She wasn't running from hardship. She was walking toward it, ready to meet it head-on, knowing that each challenge would only make her stronger. As she moved onward, the sun climbed higher in the sky, its warmth growing more intense, but it didn't feel oppressive. It felt like a kind of reassurance, as if the universe itself was reminding her that she was capable, that she was on the right path. The warmth bathed her skin, and she let it sink into her soul, filling her with energy, with life. The sound of water reached her ears. In the distance, she saw a stream, its water sparkling in the sunlight, weaving through the valley below. The sight was calming, soothing, a reminder of the natural flow of life. She made her way toward it, eager to pause for a moment by its banks. She crouched down beside the stream, dipping her fingers into the cool water. The stream rushed past its water, clear and pure, flowing with purpose, never stagnating. It was another lesson, another reminder that life was always moving forward, always changing but still moving with purpose. She smiled as she watched the water flow, feeling an odd sense of peace wash over her. Life, like the stream, was always moving. It was never still, never stagnant. There would be obstacles ahead, moments where the current felt stronger, but she knew now that she had the strength to move with it, not against it. The house, the darkness, the fear, they had all been like obstacles in the water, slowing her down, blocking her path. But now she understood that she could keep moving forward. The water, like her, would continue to flow. Sarah sat beside the stream for a while, watching the water flow by the world around her, feeling perfect in its simplicity. She wasn't thinking about where the path ahead would take her. She wasn't worried about what challenges might lie ahead. She was simply here in this moment, at peace with herself and with the world. Eventually, she stood up, brushed the grass off her pants, and took one last look at the stream. Then, with a deep breath, she turned and began walking again, the path before her, still winding up toward the mountains. Her heart was light, her spirit calm. She had come so far, and though the road ahead was still unknown, she was ready to walk it. She knew that whatever came next, she would face it with grace, with strength, and with the quiet knowing that she was exactly where she needed to be. The world was vast, but it was also full of opportunities, and Sarah was more than ready to embrace them. With each step, she moved further into the world, deeper into herself, free from the chains of the past and open to the future. As Sarah continued her journey, the path before her seemed to narrow, winding between towering trees and up the gentle slopes of the hills. The world around her was still peaceful, yet filled with the gentle pulse of life. The birds overhead sang their morning songs. The wind whispered through the branches, and the distant hum of the stream was a soft, comforting melody that accompanied her steps. The further she walked, the more the world felt like it was opening up to her, inviting her to explore its depths, to take in its beauty and its complexity. The trees, the grasses, the sky, they weren't separate from her anymore. They were part of her, woven into the very fabric of her being. The journey she had undertaken had brought her to this realization that she was never truly alone. She had always been connected to the world around her, even in the darkest moments. The house had been a test, but it had also been a bridge to her true self. She paused for a moment, looking around at the scenery, letting it sink in. The mountains loomed ahead, majestic and serene, their peaks barely visible in the early light. The air was cooler here, the wind carrying the scent of pine and earth. It was refreshing, invigorating. The next leg of her journey was waiting for her, but for now she took a deep breath, grounding herself in the present moment. As she resumed walking, the path became steeper, the terrain more challenging, but Sarah didn't hesitate. She had learned to embrace the challenges, to walk through the uncertainty without fear. Each step brought her closer to the mountains, closer to whatever awaited her there. She had no expectations, no need for answers. She was simply walking, simply being, and that was enough. The forest began to thin, the trees becoming more sparse as the ridge loomed closer. In the distance, she could see the outline of a small cabin nestled at the base of the mountains. It was humble, its wooden structure worn by time, but it felt inviting, like a place of rest after a long journey. The thought of it filled her with a sense of calm, as if the universe had set this peaceful pause in her path for a reason. When she reached the cabin, she hesitated for only a moment before walking up to the door. It creaked open with a gentle push, revealing a small, simple room. A stone fireplace stood at one end, a few chairs scattered around the room, and a window that looked out toward the mountains. The cabin was warm and welcoming, a place of quiet refuge. Inside, she found a soft blanket draped across a chair by the fire, and without thinking, she wrapped herself in it. The fire crackled softly, casting a warm glow over the room. Sarah sat by the hearth, her eyes closing for just a moment, allowing the quiet and the warmth to fill her. It was here, in this simple space, that she realized how far she had come. The house, the fear, the darkness, they were no longer part of her. The struggle, the pain, they had been necessary, yes, but they had not broken her. She had walked through the hardest parts of her journey and had come out on the other side stronger, more whole. Now she could sit here in the warmth of the cabin without any fear of what might come next. The world outside was vast and open, and Sarah was ready to step back into it. But for now, in this quiet cabin, she was content to rest. She had learned that rest too was a part of the journey. It wasn't always about moving forward, about rushing to the next step. Sometimes the journey required patience, the quiet kind of strength that came from simply being. And as the fire crackled softly and the moonlight bathed the cabin in a silvery glow, Sarah closed her eyes, feeling at peace at home exactly where she was meant to be. The path ahead would reveal itself in time. But for now, she had all she needed. The warmth of the fire lulled Sarah into a peaceful state, her thoughts drifting like the soft embers in the hearth. The crackling of the flames was a gentle reminder that she was in a safe space, far from the torment of the house and the darkness that had once consumed her. The cabin, though simple and humble, felt like a sanctuary. The flickering light danced across the wooden walls, casting long shadows that shifted with each breath of the fire. Her mind wandered back to the journey she had taken to get here, the long, winding path that had led her through fear, doubt, and ultimately peace. She had faced the darkness and emerged into the light, and now here she was sitting by the fire, content in her solitude. The weight that had once burdened her shoulders seemed so distant now, as though it had never been a part of her at all. She was free, truly free. As the fire began to dim, Sarah stood stretching her legs and stepping away from the warmth of the hearth. The room felt cozy, but she knew that the world outside was calling her. The path to the mountains, the open expanse of the land there was still so much to explore, so much to learn, and yet she didn't feel the need to rush anymore. The future was still unfolding, but for the first time, it didn't seem like something she had to chase. It was there, waiting for her, and it would come in its own time. She opened the door of the cabin, stepping out into the crisp night air. The stars above were brighter than ever, their light guiding her as she stepped forward into the night. The moon hung low, casting a soft, silvery glow on the earth. It felt as though the world had come alive, breathing with her, moving in time with her own rhythm. She walked slowly, not sure where the path would take her, but confident in her steps. The air was cool, but not cold, carrying the scent of pine and earth. She felt deeply connected to the world around her, as if everything had fallen into place. The stream she had crossed earlier now flowed gently beside her, its soft murmur like a companion on her journey. The world seemed so vast, so full of possibilities, and yet Sarah knew that she was exactly where she needed to be. The path began to wind upward again toward the mountains that loomed in the distance. The terrain was rocky, but Sarah didn't mind. She had learned that the difficult paths were often the ones that led to the most beautiful views. She didn't know what awaited her at the top of the ridge, but she felt no fear, no doubt. Whatever came next would be part of her story, part of her journey, and she was ready for it. The climb was slow but steady, and as she ascended, she found herself thinking about all the things she had left behind. The house, the spirits, the shadows, they were no longer part of her world. She had moved beyond them, not by escaping them, but by accepting them, and allowing them to be a part of her story without letting them define her. She had learned to let go of the things that no longer served her, and in doing so, she had found peace. By the time she reached the top of the ridge, the sun was beginning to rise again, casting the world in hues of gold and pink. The view before her was breathtaking, the valley stretching below the river, winding through the land like a silver thread, the mountains in the distance rising up majestically. It was a vast open world full of endless possibility. Sarah stood there for a long moment, taking it all in. She had come so far, both physically and emotionally, and now standing on this ridge, she felt a deep sense of gratitude. Gratitude for the journey, for the lessons, for the freedom she had found. The world before her was full of opportunities, and she knew that it was up to her to create the life she wanted. The past was behind her, and the future was unwritten, full of potential. She took a deep breath, feeling the air fill her lungs, and let it out slowly. There was no rush, no need to hurry. She was exactly where she was meant to be. She didn't need to know what the future held, because she knew that she had everything she needed to face it. Strength, courage, and the peace that came from knowing she had walked through the darkness and emerged into the light. With one last glance at the view before her, Sarah began to walk again. Her steps light, her heart open. The path ahead was hers to create, and she was ready to take it one step at a time. No matter what came next, she knew she was capable of facing it. The journey was hers, and she was walking it with strength, grace, and the quiet knowledge that she was free. As Sarah continued her ascent toward the distant mountain ridge, a soft, ethereal light began to emerge from the horizon. The first rays of dawn kissed the peaks of the mountains, igniting them in hues of gold lavender and soft pinks. The earth beneath her feet seemed to hum with life, and she felt a quiet joy welling up inside her. It was a simple moment, yet it held so much significance. Every sunrise was a new beginning, and every step she took felt like a fresh chapter in a story that had until now been filled with shadows and uncertainty. But not anymore. She reached the summit of the ridge, and the landscape before her stretched out in every direction, vast and endless. The mountains rose higher in the distance, their snow-capped peaks shimmering in the morning light, while the valley below was bathed in a warm, golden glow. The river she had crossed earlier wound its way through the land, sparkling like a trail of silver. Everything felt expansive, open, like a world full of endless possibilities. Standing at the top of the ridge, Sarah felt a sense of profound connection. She wasn't just standing here in the physical world. She felt in sync with the universe, as though every breath she took was in harmony with the earth itself. The air was crisp, filled with the scent of pine, and the sound of distant birds calling to each other echoed through the valley below. For a long while she simply stood there, taking in the view, savoring the peace that surrounded her. She had faced the darkness within, walked through it, learned from it. And now she was standing in the light with a future ahead of her that was wide open, ready to be shaped by her own hands. It wasn't about finding the perfect path, the right destination. It was about being present in the moment, taking each step with intention, with awareness. She had learned that life wasn't a straight line. It was a journey of ups and downs, twists and turns, and sometimes those detours led to the most beautiful, unexpected places. Sarah closed her eyes, breathing deeply, and let the moment sink into her bones. The house, the darkness, the endless whispers, they were all behind her now. She had walked through them, and she had emerged stronger, not just physically, but emotionally, spiritually. The journey had shaped her into someone new, someone who had learned to let go, to trust in herself, and to embrace life for what it was. A soft wind stirred the trees below, the sound of rustling leaves, a comforting reminder of the natural rhythm of the world. She smiled to herself, knowing that the road ahead was hers to walk. No one else could tell her what it should be, and that was the beauty of it. She was free to create her own story now, to make her own choices, to walk her own path. Sarah took a deep breath and turned away from the ridge, her eyes scanning the landscape one last time. She didn't need to know where the path would lead, nor did she need to have everything figured out. The beauty of the journey was in the uncertainty, in the unfolding of each step, each decision. The future wasn't something to fear, it was something to embrace. She stepped forward, leaving the summit behind, and began her descent into the valley below. The world was waiting for her. The river called to her as it twisted and turned its gentle current, a reflection of the way she would move forward, fluid, flexible, embracing whatever came her way. As she moved, she felt lighter, more at peace. The wind carried the scent of wildflowers now, and the sun warmed her face, filling her with energy. She was alive. She was free. She was walking into a future she could shape, a future that was full of possibilities. The journey was never about the end. It was about the moments in between the steps, the breaths, the quiet reflections that shaped who she was becoming. And Sarah knew, with every part of her being, that this was only the beginning.